On with Jim Fish.
Hi, I'm Jim Fish, President and CEO of WM. Welcome to the 2022 WM Sustainability Forum. At WM, we're always working for a sustainable tomorrow. It's that focus on sustainability over many decades that's helped WM become so much more than a waste management company. And that's why I'm excited to announce that going forward, waste management will be known as WM. So let's talk specifics here. How is WM not just a waste management company, but a for tomorrow company? How are we always working for a sustainable tomorrow? Well, we strive to live our brand promise through the services we provide, the sustainable solutions we offer, the innovations we invest in, the people we hire, and the future we're committed to. You know, it may not look like it at first glance, but this 660-acre WM facility outside of Dallas, Texas, is home to a renewable energy revolution. This facility really represents two huge efforts that we're making at WM. The first is renewable energy and how to close the loop. That's honestly the most important part, a full circle here. And then secondly, improving our landfills using the latest technology that helps manage the landfill and mitigate landfill emissions. Do you hear that sound? That's the sound of a renewable energy revolution, where WM has made some massive investments. This control room is part of a circular economy where landfill gas is collected, cleaned, and distributed as renewable natural gas to power WM trucks and nearby communities. So this facility and this complex is by definition a circular economy. Every few minutes, a truck is driving past this building with my waste in it, with your waste in it, and it starts a transformation process through the landfill, through this renewable natural gas plant, of turning that waste into renewable natural gas, which is then used to power that truck and go back up and pick up curbside waste again. So round and round it goes. We're greatly expanding our renewable natural gas capabilities. Today we have 16 plants across North America. That's a mix of WM plants and partnerships. We're also building 9 brand new facilities that will be completed by 2024, with more in the pipeline. And with over 100 landfill gas to electric projects across North America, we have a significant opportunity to convert and further scale. So here's a great stat for you. Renewable energy powers more than 50% of our natural gas fleet of 19,000 vehicles. And by the way, we're way ahead of our goal because our goal was to power 50% by 2025. WM operates 179 natural gas fueling stations across North America, and 25 of those are open to the public. And that circular process that I talked about, that's saving nearly 146,000 gallons of diesel fuel every single day. Landfill gas to energy and renewable natural gas plants can power nearly 490,000 homes. I think it's safe to say WM is leading the renewable energy revolution. WM landfills are really some of the best in the world, but we're constantly working on new ways to improve them, using satellites and aerial flights and on-the-ground sampling. We're developing tools to help with things like leak detection and repair, and more support for research on ways to measure and mitigate landfill emissions. The site collects and manages landfill gas through a state-of-the-art gas collection system consisting of pipes and pumps that help extract that gas so that we can convert it to renewable energy. And while WM is always working for a sustainable tomorrow, we're helping our customers do the same. WM tracks data and provides analytics to inform their environmental strategies, help reduce costs, minimize risk, and divert more waste to its next best use. Even within WM, we're making progress on our own sustainability initiatives. WM Services avoids 3 times more greenhouse gas emissions than our operations generate, and our 2038 goal is to reduce or avoid 4 times our operating emissions. And WM is always working to minimize environmental impact by reducing carbon emissions across the value chain, helping to educate and inspire customers, industry thought leaders, and others to operate more sustainably. One of the most impactful ways that we're always working for a sustainable tomorrow is right here, recycling. Well, we expect to invest $200 million in recycling infrastructure in 2022. In 2021, we helped recycle more than 15 million tons of materials. Demand for recycled content products is increasing every day. It increased significantly last year. We've invested over $700 million in new and upgraded recycle facilities just since 2018. And over the past 2 years, we've opened new materials recovery facilities. We call them MRFs in Chicago, in Salt Lake City, in Raleigh, Durham, and in Sun Valley, California. State-of-the-art recycled technology that really reduces contamination includes things like robotics, intelligent sorting, volumetric scanners, cameras on collection vehicles. MRF upgrades are underway across the board, and they include new renovations in Houston, in Cleveland, in Washington, in Maryland. We've got 29 existing MRFs to be upgraded or enhanced through this technology and capacity increases. WM's recycling process is more efficient than ever. We increased plastics capture by 25% just since 2019. We're getting better every day. WM uses recycled materials in our employee uniforms. And that means the drivers who pick up the material from your curbside recycle bin are now wearing uniforms made from the material they're picking up. How cool is that? WM has also invested in Continuous Materials, and Continuous Materials is a company that transforms hard-to-recycle plastics and paper into a product called Everboard, which is a high-performance roofing material. I think it just demonstrates our real commitment to sustainability, and by investing in a company like Continuous, which helps take plastics out of a landfill, it demonstrates that commitment to sustainability and to making the earth a better place. As more companies set aggressive goals for the use of recycled content, we can scale with them and help them achieve those commitments. We're expanding our efforts to increase recyclables from customers while helping to expand access to recycling. And WM's continually investing in the infrastructure to make this happen. We're even turning our customers' plastics back into new curbside recycling and trash cards. We've modernized our landfills as renewable energy sources and the best disposal option for specialty waste streams. We've integrated and scaled organic programs to serve our food waste customers and support food waste diversion goals. We continue to work with a large meal kit company to help them reduce food waste and lower greenhouse gas emissions. We're a circular logistics operator, offering collection, sorting, and identifying new recycled material markets as they emerge. Beneficial end use of materials, that's the key. We don't limit our thinking with respect to sustainability to just the environment. Sustainability includes our people as well. I spend a huge percentage of my time focused on our people and what we can do for our people, who then in turn help our environment through our sustainability efforts. Whether it is protecting their pay during COVID, Share the Green, where we focus on female supplier diversity, or whether it is Your Tomorrow. Your Tomorrow provides college benefits not just for the employee, but for their dependents as well, which is the real uniqueness of it. You hear people talk a lot about diversity, but you shouldn't forget about the fact that inclusion is part of that. And inclusion to me means that we're inclusive in accepting of others' ideas, others' opinions. That is critically important in an organization. And for us to be successful, we have to be not only diverse, but inclusive as well. Now let's talk about community impact. This is all about working to support and improve the areas where we live and work. And we have an ambitious goal of reaching 1 million participants through education and engagement programs by 2038. Right here at Skyline, we have 150 acres that are set aside as certified wildlife habitat. And for more than 20 years, WM has partnered with the Wildlife Habitat Council to protect wildlife in sites like Skyline. We all live and work in these communities. And so they are critically important to us. So not only do we do business with these large communities and small communities, but they're places where we live. It's places where our kids go to school and where we go to church. And so they are critically important to us, not just as business people, but as residents. My favorite part of the WM brand purpose is that we're always working. And while we've made some incredible progress for our people and for our planet, there's always more to do, both for today and for tomorrow.
Up next, environmental impact, net positive. And now, environmental impact, net positive, with Tara Hemmer and Paul Pullman.
Good morning and welcome. I'm privileged to be having a conversation today with one of the leading voices in driving purpose in business, Paul Pullman. For those of you who don't know Paul was the CEO of Unilever from 2009 to 2019. And during that time, he transformed the company through Unilever's sustainable living plan and drove significant business results. When he exited Unilever, he wanted to continue that journey, and he co-chairs and co-founded Imagine, an organization that brings together business leaders and CEOs to drive towards meeting or exceeding the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. Welcome to the stage, Paul.
Thank you, Tara. And first of all, best wishes for 2022.
Indeed. We all need those best wishes. So I'd love to dive right into your book, Net Positive. And you speak to the fact that in order for companies to thrive now and in the future, really those companies need to reprioritize and need to reprioritize quickly.
You know, fundamentally, we have defined Net Positive as a company profiting and thriving by solving the world's problems, not by causing them. We have a very simple question that we ask business, and that is the world better off because your business is in it or not? At a more detailed level, if you want to, for us, a net positive company is actually a company that's improving the well-being of everyone that they impact, be it employees, customers, suppliers, and communities. And many organizations, I believe, are at the beginning of that journey. And it involves building partnerships. It involves setting targets that the world needs, not the targets that you can get away with. It involves working on the more transformational changes that the world needs. And the reason we're advocating for this net positive thinking is very simple. I think what COVID has shown us very clearly is that you can't have healthy people on an unhealthy planet. It has also reminded us that we cannot have infinite growth on a finite planet, and anything you can do infinitely is by definition unsustainable. So our argument is very simple. CSR, or being less bad, is simply still bad. It's not good enough anymore, nor is being sustainable neither good nor bad. We are in a world that we've overshot many of the planetary boundaries, and increasingly we need to start to think regenerative, restorative, reparative. And that is what we call net positive. The hallmarks of a net positive company are very simple. These are companies that, as I said, take ownership of all the impacts and consequences, intended or not, that they have by their presence here on Earth, if you want to. These are companies that operate for the long-term benefit of both business and society. They create a positive return, actually, for all of their stakeholders. Their shareholder value, which you've done so extremely well with waste management, is a result of what you do, not a myopic goal in itself. And finally, these companies forge the broader partnerships that are needed to drive these bigger systems changes that society is looking for.
But one of the things that struck me about net positive and the concepts in there is we often hear about environmental issues, and there's a lot of discussion around carbon and carbon negative and carbon neutrality. But it often isn't connected in a holistic way to the social issues. And when you speak about net positive, it's really making the connection of all of the above.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more, Tara. What COVID, again, I think has put a spotlight on, or certainly put it under the microscope, is that people that were already getting the wrong end of the stick in this world are also the people that paid disproportionately the price for COVID, you know. And companies that really understand that and take care of that are not only increasingly better valued by the financial community, but also more resilient. And frankly, these are the companies that have done better during COVID, and I think are also a better place coming out of it, simply because of the stronger relationships and the higher trust, which is so important nowadays.
One of your big pivots after leaving Unilever was to work more directly with many of the companies that are really going to drive the change that's needed in the world.
Well, I realized that, Tara, when I was CEO, that there are many things a CEO can do, but there are also some things they can't do alone, and yet they're being held to a much higher level of responsibility or accountability, if you want to, than they actually can deliver on. No CEO can solve the issues of plastics in the oceans or deforestation or human rights in the world, if you want to, by themselves. And the reason I created Imagine as a social enterprise is to create a neutral platform where we bring a critical mass of CEOs by industry sector together across the value chain. And what we see is that as we build trust with these CEOs, they collectively become more courageous. You can start to attack issues that CEOs normally don't get to. And by having about 20-25% of a value chain present, we can attract civil society and governments and drive the broader systems changes. So we like to work at this collective level, currently optimizing within a current system that frankly isn't designed anymore to deliver is very difficult. So we need these bolder changes now more than ever. These things are not easy to do, but increasingly, contrary to people's beliefs when COVID came, when people thought we would go back to the same behavior as during the financial crisis, which was more cost-cutting and short-term, and forgetting ESG and governments not interested in climate change, we've actually seen the opposite. Governments have stepped up. 90% of the GDP in governments have now made commitments to be net zero by 2050, to stay below the 1.5 degrees Celsius. We've seen half of the financial market come forward with the Glasgow Financial Alliance on net zero, $130 trillion of money under management, half the world's capital saying we want to decarbonize portfolios. And likewise, we've seen the private sector step up and set science-based targets, and increasingly not only making 2050 targets, which is very far away, to be honest, but also setting increasingly the targets for 2030, like you've done yourself.
Yeah, it really does feel like we're at this tipping point. You know, in the past, we might have had, business on board or NGOs on board, but we didn't have government or vice versa. It seems like we're finally at a point where many of these key stakeholders are aligning to drive real change. And you talk a lot about the power of partnerships and bringing those different stakeholders together.
We simply cannot attack these bigger issues without the broader partnership, sometimes at industry level alone, sometimes that needs to be done across industries, and sometimes these partnerships go even further to include civil society or governments. For example, right now, we are probably entering a decade where multilateral institutions have difficulties of working together, where global governance is at a low point, where increasingly in the countries itself you see that tension, this populism or nationalism that has crept in, exactly because we haven't addressed these basic fundamental issues like climate change and inequality. And increasingly we see that it's difficult for governments alone to solve these issues. And the void that needs to be filled has to come from the private sector. Business has the resources, the money, the people, the innovative capabilities, a little bit longer term perspective, believe it or not, quite often. And many people in society give business a higher level of trust, but also expect business to be part of these broader changes that are now needed. But as I said, no company alone can do this. In Unilever, we made a commitment to move to sustainable sourcing for all of our ingredients, but some of them, we really were a small part of the global market. On others, like making palm oil sustainable, it required governments from Indonesia and Malaysia to be there. To get deforestation out of your value chain, you certainly want the government of Brazil to work with you, not against you. So forming these broader coalitions is very important. And that is an area that requires shared objectives to start with, a high level of trust, if you want to, transparency in what you do, aligned objectives between all of the partners, and then, time-bound commitments that are transparently discussed and people held accountable for. And this is really what a net positive company does. It uses that multi-stakeholder model and these broader alliances in their ecosystem, if you want to drive these bigger changes. Goal 17 on the Sustainable Development Goals talks about partnership, and it defines it very well, not as this contractual partnership, but really this partnership for the common good, where you actually put the interest of others ahead of yourself, knowing that by doing so, you're better off yourself as well. This book, Net Positive, talks about two forms of partnership that are important for us. The one chapter is what we call 1 + 1 = 11, where really it's the partnership of responsibility in your own value chain beyond scope 1 and 2. Many companies still stop there. They think you can outsource your value chain and also outsource your responsibilities. That just doesn't work anymore. The second chapter that we have in the book is really what we call it takes 3 to tango. That gets into the tougher partnerships where you need government and civil society to come together with business to solve these things. And here again, a great example from waste management is the advocacy you do to change the laws in the US around recycling and what's possible there, and to ensure that the right policies are in place to drive what we know is a very big challenge to change this consumer behavior and get to the circular economy, for example. And that's why we have this enormously challenging but exciting chapter in the book, which we call the elephants in the room, which are really the tougher challenges on corruption, human rights, money in politics, CEO salaries, and there to gain that trust that is needed for these broader partnerships. What we are advocating is really that the companies also think about these tougher challenges and act consistently to be able to earn that right of the seat at the table, if you want to.
One thing you mentioned earlier is measurement, and you have a great quote in your book, which I want to make sure I get right, related to measurement, and it's, we need to measure what we treasure. I actually wrote it down and it's sitting on my desk now. We need to measure what we treasure. Talk a little bit more about that, because it goes beyond, the typical measurements. If you think about GDP or even free cash flow, those types of things that companies are measured on a quarterly basis. What do you mean when you say we need to measure what we treasure?
So you mentioned GDP already, Tara, and that's important. Having a sense of total economic activity is fine, but GDP was actually developed by Simon Kostnik in the 60s as a measure of economic output in the era of manufacturing, if you want to, before the rise of this, what we might call intangible value. GDP counts everything as a good thing. If you have more cancer or medical costs, if you have more wars or conflicts, if you have more damage that you need to repair because of giant storms or floods or fires, that's if you cut down the trees and sell the wood, this is all economic activity that is measured in GDP. But what GDP doesn't measure is peace, is justice, quality of education, absence of mental health issues, air quality, and I could go on and on and on. So interestingly, everything that makes life worth living for is not necessarily captured in GDP. So we need to go to another broader measure. Interestingly, we did a study with the weighted impact accounts at Harvard, looking at 4,500 companies. And what we actually found was, to our surprise, that companies within a certain industry, compared to other companies within that industry, that those companies that actively attack these negative externalities actually are already higher valued by the financial market, which means that these non-material issues have become increasingly material. And we now see that companies that are more gender diverse have a better financial performance. Companies that aggressively attack climate change and publish that and make faster progress have a better financial performance in general, and so forth. And you've seen that with waste management once more. I looked at your share price over the last few years, And because of your strategy of decoupling your growth from environmental impact, on really moving to circular economy, on finding alternative upscaling possibilities for some of the things, you've actually seen the rewards in your share price. And that was the same for Unilever. Despite our fairly aggressive Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, which was being seen by a lot of people as impossible to achieve, we actually went quite far into that direction, but at the same time, over the 10-year period, had a 300% shareholder return. So it's this broader concept. And countries are already starting to think about this. We see other indicators emerging, like a genuine progress indicator, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Human Rights Development Index, the Gross Happiness Index that has come out. And companies are starting to realize this as well. Their models increasingly move to decoupling production from resource use or carbon emission, to embracing these circular economies, or to finding regenerative solutions. So I think success is increasingly being defined broader than the financial returns. And the last point, just to bring that home, is that increasingly we're starting to see, by looking, for example, at the Russell 1000 companies, that companies that run these longer-term multi-stakeholder models, put sustainability at the core of their strategy, are also now starting to significantly outperform their peer groups that pay lip service to this. And this is why you see ESG funds taking off. That's why we've also seen 80% of the ESG funds, environmental, social, and governance, outperform the non-ESG funds over 2021. So, we're moving in the right direction, and I'm actually not that worried in that sense anymore. The case is fairly convincing, and most people are there. What I'm now more focused on is that everybody thinks they're moving. We are all doing significantly more than we've done before, but unfortunately, as we've waited so long to address these issues, the scale and speed that we're moving is simply not fast enough. And in some extent, the gap is actually increasing whilst we're doing more. So that is the issue, in essence, that we need to address. And that really boils down at the end of the day to leadership.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you were talking, I was thinking about everything that's happening with the Great Resignation, because in a lot of ways, the Great Resignation is about happiness and purpose, and our talent pool wanting to go to places that fill them up in a different way and make sure that they're driving towards something that's bigger. And that's certainly something that, when you think about young people, in your book, you talk about over 50% of millennials have said that they will leave or have left a company because it didn't align with their purpose. And we have many young leaders and future leaders listening here today. So I'd love to hear from you how you think that they can play in this net positive space, and what is their role from an advocacy perspective in ensuring that the future will be theirs, ensuring that this future that we're all envisioning actually happens.
No, this is such an important question. And this Great Resignation, last month alone in the US, 3.5 million people disengaged. And one of the bigger issues now that most of the CEOs that I talk to on a daily basis talk about is the attraction of talent. But then you have to bring that discussion straight back to purpose. This millennial or Gen Z generation wants to be part of something bigger than themselves. They really want to ensure that they create a better world for all. That's why I also like your mission statements, which is really helping inhabitants of this earth. The way you put it might be slightly different, but to make it better than they found it. And this is really a purpose that is extremely strong. The young people below 30 years old is 50% of the world population, actually, and it's over 100% tomorrow. And they're young, they're creative, they're technologically savvy, they embrace partnerships, they're purpose-driven, they think multi-generational. So they have all the elements, I think, to be successful. And I work a lot with young people in the different movements that we try to touch with Net Positive. And I can tell you the ideas that they're coming with and the entrepreneurial spirit that you have there is incredible. They see this, by the way, not as risk management or a big threat, but most of them see this as an enormous, enormous opportunity. But obviously, we're not embracing them at the rate that we should. I was at Glasgow for the 10 days, and I would say the average age of the people in the conference itself might have been about 60 years old, but the average age outside making their voices heard was probably less than 30 years old. So this is the moment, I believe, that we should not only give the young people and leaders a seat at the table, but in many cases, we should actually give them the table. And they're demanding for it. 86% of the millennials or Gen Zs are now expecting CEOs to be the societal leaders. In fact, 50%, as you say, have made choices not to work for organizations. They are simply not moving fast enough. We're seeing boycotts or we're seeing walkouts when they are dissatisfied with what management says and what management does. I believe in every company now where you have a lot of young people. Most companies are actually, the majority of people are already baby boomers and to some extent Gen Zs. But they're making very clear in these companies that management should close the say-do gap that still is too prevalent in too many companies if you want to. So what can they do specifically? I think what they should do, first of all, encourage the leaders of today not to keep asking the question why, which is still happening too much, but start demanding when. We have endless debates still if we should act and how much we should do and if others are not responsible. But I think the young people have a little bit of a higher level of impatience. So they don't want to be paralyzed by these discussions. They really want to have the real targets, the real deadlines that the world can support, not that you can get away with. So the second thing that young people can do, be constructively skeptical, I would say. You know, in every optimist, which we all should be to some extent in terms of being able to tackle these challenges, we should also ask the right questions. When we see companies not moving fast enough on racial diversity, we should call that out. When we see them making statements on environmental targets, but then paying lip service when it comes to actual delivery, we should call it out. Just like we should call out politicians when they say we will build back better, but then spend their money on other areas. And the final thing that young people can do, the third area, I would say, is be part of this net positive movement. This is probably the biggest economic, social, and planetary opportunity that we have in our lifetimes. And I don't think your bosses that might move a little bit slower than what you are looking for are not necessarily bad people, but they are also not really aware sometimes of what is going on. Educate them, show them that things can be done better from all aspects for all stakeholders, but also that it actually improves the resilience and the profitability of an organization. So become part of that change movement constructively and bring in the new technologies, the knowledge, the benchmarking that you need to make your companies that you work in successful.
I love that. Really helps show how you can do it better, how you can do it faster, because that's ultimately what we need if we're going to move very quickly on this journey to be net positive. Well, Paul, I cannot thank you enough. This has been a fantastic conversation. I feel like we could have talked for another hour and still not tackled or scratched the surface on all the things that we wanted to talk about here today. And looking forward to continuing on the journey of net positive here at WM and helping support other companies in their journey.
No, thank you for what you're doing. And certainly for the audience for taking the time out to listen to this conversation. As you said, it's important for all of us, but it's also something that we are passionate about, and I know the audience is. And I certainly hope to see you soon in person, but in the meantime, be safe. Thank you very much.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you.
Up next, circularity, partnering in circularity.
I remember my first job on an oil spill was to get in a boat and chase down oil-soaked birds. I think that day was really got me going into the environmental business.
My name is Mike Holmes.
I work for WM Sustainability Services. We do environmental cleanup projects in places like this. There's not a lot of environmental contractors that will go out and clean up some of these remote sites that we're cleaning up. WM is capable of doing a lot of these remote projects that other companies won't do. It's not that they can't do them, but they won't do it because the risk factor is so high. We've done environmental cleanup projects in the South Pacific, Kwajalein, Midway, Johnston Atoll, Wake Island, western shores of Alaska, Nome. Mike and I have seen a few things. We bring it back to life. That's one of the most satisfying aspects of any job that I'm on. Bring it back to original condition. I love Alaska. There's just no prettier of a place to be. So we're headed to the dock that we use to load soils off of Kodiak Island. So on this project, we had 12 dump trucks and trailers running. We had 10 crew members working around the clock. We pulled off several thousand tons of contaminated soil. It was a very messy site. It's got petroleum contaminated, diesel contaminated. It's really important we keep this out of the water. One of my favorite projects was cleaning up in Southeast Alaska. Pretty remote. We brought in equipment, labor, trucks, cutting gear, and we processed all the scraps. That job took about 8 months to plan, but the scrap metal paid for the project. It was absolutely free to the communities. Those are the projects we really enjoy doing. If somebody wanted to get into the environmental business, I would highly recommend it. If you really want to make a difference, an immediate difference, get into the environmental business. When it comes to environmental cleanup projects, there are no shortcuts. Just be stewards of the environment. In most cases, we don't get a second chance. Once we lose it, we lose it. WM is more than a paycheck. It's something I believe in, something I love, something I'm in every day.
This is a WM landfill. And what happens here might surprise you, like renewable energy production. WM sites just like this one help to produce enough energy that helps fuel the largest truck fleet in North America and power thousands of homes. Like everything technology touches, landfills have come a long way. And facilities like the one we're at today, this is an engineering marvel. Here's a crazy thought for you. Each year, WM oversees the safe disposal of millions of tons of waste. Millions of tons. And they do it smarter and more sustainably by figuring out how trash can be repurposed and reused. WM also collects millions of tons of recyclable materials, but a lot of stuff still ends up in a landfill. In fact, the average American creates 4.5 pounds of trash every single day. So the question is, how can we turn trash into an asset? When you collect tons of waste in a place like a landfill, it naturally produces methane gas when it breaks down. This WM facility turns that gas into usable energy.
The turbine plant produces approximately 3.5 megawatts of exported power, which translates into approximately 3,500 homes that can use electricity generated from landfill waste. This plant runs 24/7, producing electricity.
As we mentioned earlier, as organic material breaks down, it produces methane. And in a landfill like this one, that methane is trapped below the surface. It can be hundreds of feet down there. Just like an oil well pulls oil from the ground, this landfill has about 200 wells, like this one, that use vacuum suction to pull up the raw gas from the ground and sends it through these pipes to a super high-tech processing plant.
We can create biofuel from the methane gas that is created from that garbage. Our garbage trucks that actually come to your house run on biofuel. And what a cool process. We can pick up your garbage running on the garbage that you actually dumped in the landfill the prior week.
Okay, I got a fun fact. WM is the nation's largest operator of biofuel trash and recycling trucks. By using biofuel in its trucks, WM saves over 71 million gallons of diesel fuel per year. 71 million. It also reduces its carbon emissions by 30,000 metric tons from trash. That is mind-blowing, okay? Let's get big picture here. As a nation, we produce over 250 million tons of trash per year, and most of that ends up in a landfill. But what if every landfill across the country was tapped as an energy source? WM is doing its part to make a difference, and you can help by buying only what you need, donating unused stuff that can be repurposed, recycling right, and using a landfill as a last resort. You know, it's amazing to see the innovations that are happening here today that are going to make tomorrow even better. How do you turn 400,000 pounds of hard-to-recycle material into the roof of a warehouse or big box store? Continuous is a company that takes plastics and paper that can't usually be recycled and turns it into super high-performance roofing material. Here's how they do it. This is called Everboard, and it's made from paper and plastic that can't typically be recycled. Materials like food packaging, shopping bags, coffee cups, bubble wrap, and other shipping materials. Let's see how we get from this to this. Waste is diverted to a continuous facility where tens of thousands of pounds of tough-to-recycle plastics and paper are processed every day. The materials are separated, sorted, and conditioned. So as the materials move through the facility, magnets remove all the metals so it can be recycled too, while the papers and plastics are extracted, separated, and dried. Paper and plastics get shredded. Shredded up plastic and paper is put through the continuous process to create a mat of raw materials using a special recipe. Once it's all compressed and finished, boom, Everboard. This facility produces 7 million square feet of Everboard per year. The new continuous facility coming in 2024 will produce over 150 million square feet of Everboard. That's around 2,300 grocery store roofs. That's amazing. So what makes Everboard so great? It's a high-performance product that helps extend the life of a roof by protecting it from weather, including hail and strong winds. Plus, it's much easier and less expensive to install. For every 1,000 square Everboard, that keeps 800 pounds of plastic and 1,200 pounds of paper from going to a landfill. Continuous reduces the amount of waste that goes to a landfill by 30%. By 2050, as much as 12 billion tons of trash will end up in a landfill. But we can make a difference. WM and Continuous are working together to give hard-to-recycle materials a second life. Let's keep working for a sustainable tomorrow.
And now, Circularity, partnering in circularity with George Bandy, Nick Engineer, and Molly Wood.
Welcome, everyone, to our session on circularity and partnering for circularity. I'm Molly Wood. I am most recently a climate tech investor doing venture capital, looking for early stage startups who are looking for climate solutions. And I have been a journalist for 20-something years before that, covering climate adaptation and the climate crisis. I'm excited to introduce this session with George Bandy and Nick Engineer. And I'm hoping, so I'll start with you, George, if you wouldn't mind, give us a little bit of your background, what you do, who you are, and how you came to be on this panel.
Sure. Thank you. I've been fortunate enough to be in the sustainability movement since its early inception, the early 90s. I was a sustainability officer for the University of Texas in Houston, fortunate to serve on the President's Council for Sustainable Development, served as a chairman of the United States Green Building Council, did a long stint in corporate with Ray Anderson from Interface, who was one of the early adopters of sustainability and looking at circular movement throughout an organization, worked at Mohawk, then at Amazon. So I've had a vast array of experiences from higher education to NGOs to corporate platforms to be able to experience sustainability and circularity. So I'm excited to be here and have worked tirelessly to try to make sure that these impacts have a significant factor in moving us forward around the areas of sustainability.
And then Nick, you're up next.
Thanks, Molly. Good to see you. So I lead the foundation's operations and strategy in North America. Been with the foundation for about 6 years. And before that, I spent about 12 years in and around management consulting. So working with organizations across most industries to help improve performance and think about how they could better embed a sense of purpose into their work. So I spend most of my time now working with large corporations, large education organizations, helping them to think about this idea of a circular economy, what it means to their business, to their organization, and how they can help us create a better world.
So guys, let's actually start with the basics, because circularity is a relatively new concept, I think. Clearly it's been a part of your worlds and your conversation for several years, but in terms of business adoption and consumer understanding, it's still, I think, being understood and worked out a little bit. So I will come back to Nick first to start us off. What does it mean? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and you're right. It's an interesting challenge in that, in many ways, the idea of a circular economy has been around for a long time. In that the principles around sharing, regenerating nature, eliminating waste and pollution, these sorts of thoughts have been part of many societies for many, many decades and hundreds of years in cases. But as a concept in the business vernacular, as a concept and an idea for leaders of organizations around the world, it's pretty new. We think it's been sort of making its way to the sort of top of organizations for about 10 years. We think it has a pretty clear meaning. We talk about three principles. We talk about eliminating waste and pollution. We talk about keeping products and materials in circulation, and we talk about regenerating nature. So those three principles really define a circular economy for the foundation.
George, how about you? And then how do you translate that into what it means for the average American or the average business?
I think that Nick touched on some really amazing points, but people have been measuring life cycle assessment for a while. I think that one of the things around circularity is they leave off closing the loop on the back end, or how you manage materials on the front end. I think that has finally caught up to us. So you hear a lot about supply chain issues with materials, supply chain issues with product. That's a direct connection with a lack of materials and an increase in population and need for these different materials. So we can't keep up with the pace. So circularity allows us to have the opportunity to be able to think about things more holistically. There were some aspects of circularity that some companies got right early on. Alcoa Can't Wait, recycling aluminum. That's been around for an extended period of time, where people were looking at taking something because it was easy to do. I think some of the more complex materials have made it a little more difficult for people to think about circularity around an economy based on the business and how many different parts go into that particular process.
Mm-hmm. Give me some more examples, if you would. Let's just try to keep bringing this home when we think about this from a business perspective. It encompasses recycling. It may encompass thinking about what happens to your product at the end of its life, right? And almost putting that through a customer service lens. Like, who's doing this well? And when you do it well, what does it really look like?
There are multiple companies that do a really good job of embracing circularity. And I think that what we have to take into consideration is there's a lack of infrastructure for recycling materials. There's not the capacity that we used to have to repair things like televisions and radios, because they become a little less expensive, a little bit more easy to obtain. The price has gone down, so people are not as connected to repairing things. So that kind of created a different kind of platform. One of the things about business that I think really made this move forward was statements like, it's no longer okay to privatize the wealth and socialize the risk.
Yeah, Nick, do you want to jump in there? How do you also tie that to economic incentives? Like, clearly there are reputational benefits for getting this right. Are there, business forces at play here too, in addition to scarcity of material, that make this necessary, obviously, in addition to the environmental importance?
Yeah. No, I think absolutely. And to pick up on what George was saying, we started that train of thought with recycling and post-use recovery of materials. But actually, the circular economy is a much bigger idea. It is about fundamentally thinking differently about how we design the economy, what we design it to do, how we design it to use and metabolize these materials that George was referencing. So this idea about, by design, eliminating waste and pollution, by design, circulating materials and resources, and by design, regenerating nature. That's all profound. That's all about systems thinking. It's about far more than what happens once someone has used a thing for a certain amount of time. And so this notion of a bigger idea and the implications of those design decisions that we all make is I think really important. It is absolutely about economics. The foundation is one of many organizations that have done a great deal of work to really demonstrate the business case for a circular economy. We've done that looking at specific material flows such as plastic, and in industries such as fashion. We've also done it in different geographies, so thinking about different geographical context for this idea. And really, I think I'd be so bold as to say there's now almost an overwhelming set of evidence that demonstrates that the economic value case, however you want to cut it, is compelling, is important, and is relevant to really almost every organization on the planet.
So, George, give us a sense of where to start. We don't want to focus on the barriers. We want to focus on, I certainly, I have been describing this as like the get to work. It is get work time. So when businesses and consumers and institutions are starting to get to work, where should they begin?
So one thing is that we have to think about this holistically. Nick touched on a couple of things that I want to branch out on. End of life disposition. So one of the questions is, who's responsible? The consumer when they get a product, the manufacturer when they make a product, the store when it sells a product, the people who deliver the product, landfills who receive the product, waste management, like who is responsible for that product at the end of life? We all are. It's just a matter of how do we create an infrastructure that allows end of life disposition is the most complex component, but it's the component that includes everyone. And so we have to create a platform that allows everyone to be able to contribute. We all have a responsibility to manufacture simple materials that can actually break down in nature relatively simple, so you don't have as much complexity in the marketplace, or thinking about how you keep those in a technical loop where you create a platform to make it easy for the consumer to send products back so that they can be recycled again. Apple does a good job of that in terms of what they do with the iPhone. You're starting to see more and more companies begin to engage in that process to receive materials back, to be able to, use those materials again in the next platform of what they're creating. I think the other thing is the raw material extraction phase. It is probably one of the most unregulated parts of the supply chain process. We'll make rules and laws and regulations in order to pull material from where we need to pull material from if we think that it's going to bring value to our society and culture. There needs to be some thinking about, how much is too much? What is enough? And beginning to look at these things. World Resource Institute is doing some really good work around understanding where these materials lie with this increase in population and our need for sustaining Mother Earth in a much more strategic way. I think the final thing that Nick really touched on that we need to think about as we begin to prepare to look at circular economy differently is systematic thinking. The Industrial Revolution, the old Industrial Revolution was take, make, waste. Waste was calculated into it. Like you knew that you were going to pay a certain amount for the waste inside of your manufacturing, what was left over, and you didn't think about what would happen at the end of its life. If you think about it this way, you take things from Mother Earth faster than she can put them back. You convert them into formats from liquid or solids into gas that create ozone issues or create issues with chemicals that become gases that you can't capture, NOx, SOx, those types of things. And then you create landfills and ask Mother Nature to heal all of that and put it in communities of concern where you don't really have the infrastructure for nature to be able to take those materials back. That is a system that's flawed. And we need to think about this as a broader system of how do we ease the tension in these areas where we can.
George, if you had a magic wand or you had 3 shots on goal, where would you start? What could you distill for us as some really impactful changes that you would love to see if you could just make it happen?
Well, to piggyback on something that Nick said, I think one of the challenges is that we've created a culture globally where we only respond to situations that are bad. It's only when there's a bad tornado or a bad hurricane or when you can't get the parts that you need for a car or when those things happen and all of a sudden everybody rushes. It's almost a knee-jerk reaction. And that's the opposite of systematic thinking. And sometimes the rush to try to repair creates a little bit more of a challenge with meeting the circular economy goals. So I think one of the things that we would start with, number one, is education, educating the consumer. I think the second part that we need is to begin to think about designing for deconstruction in the business arena. when you make something, give you a great example. I used this example the last time I was on a panel. I have a 67 Chevrolet Impala. Everything on that car is metal. Find a 2021 Chevy Impala. Almost everything on that car is plastic.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a whole evolution of how we can get these materials. Can these materials come back? Can we remelt them? Can we make new fan tracks? All of these materials begin to now move into a different arena. The way that circular economy works is that how do you get those materials back and use them all over again? And can you create a pathway to receive them back holistically? In order to be able to do that, you got to think about designing for deconstruction. You have to design them so they can be disassembled easily. You can create them so that you can get those materials back. And the complexity by which we're creating materials now makes that even more difficult. So I think that businesses are in the future that become readily successful as they move up the supply chain ladder. I think we'll be designing things that they absolutely can control their supply chain. That's one of the biggest challenges that you hear about now, is that you can't control the supply chain. You always got to have a spike in pricing. If you had more control of, designing for deconstruction and created some infrastructure to bring those materials back, then you create a pathway where you can control, and it increases your profitability because you have access to raw materials that other people may not have. And I think the final thing is it does require some policy. And of course, there's no secret that the EU is always ahead of us on policy in the US. How do we begin to create some global unilateral agreed to, sunlight should belong to everybody. Clean air should belong to everybody. There are some things that we should agree upon that we should be able to provide for future generations to be able to enjoy, that we can look at some ways that we can agree on some things globally to begin to look at strategies and policies that make sense globally. And I think that we're starting to see a little bit of that, but I think that you'll be pushed into a situation now where you'll begin to think about it a little bit more readily available. So I think that there's three pillars, education being one of them, businesses being able to come out, and policy as well. Because I think that if we're waiting on policy to lead business, that's probably not going to happen. It hasn't happened in the years that I've been around. But I think that if business begins to move in this direction and kind of begin to have some breakthroughs with some technology and some innovations that are out there that are readily available, and working with NGOs that are doing some great work like Nick's organization and others, I think that we have an opportunity to begin to create some case studies of success that people can see and begin to pattern themselves after you render that appropriately.
Could you both, I'll start with George, draw for us a bright line to the stakes? How does the lack of a circular economy affect not only the environment, but perpetrate environmental injustice?
If I might go first, and I think George is better placed to speak to the latter half of that, certainly given his experience. But we know that when we think about a pathway towards 1.5 degrees in terms of the Paris Agreement and our goals around climate change, we know that the way we make and use things is going to be responsible for 45% of achieving that target. So we simply have no chance of meeting our climate goals, let alone goals related to biodiversity or ocean health or other big challenges. We simply have to think about this question of a circular economy and how we make that and use things. So in our view, it's inevitable. It's absolutely essential that it is part of it, and it's a very, very significant part of it as well. So I'll pause there, but it's really clear that this question of how we make and use things is something that is going to have to be tackled.
Piggyback on what Nick said, there's so much wrapped up in how we make and use things and the infrastructure that we build to make and use things. So the built environment is also a huge contributor to that number in terms of, buildings and manufacturing facilities and how they're built and what are they used as energy resources. Like those types of things totally have a huge impact on that 1.5 degrees that we need to really to get our grasp around in order to have the impact that we need to. I think that there's a huge opportunity to look at this systematically. I don't think that we're going to accomplish this overnight. It's a long trajectory by which we need to look at creating circular economy. I think Nick points out some amazing opportunities that we have with the innovation hubs and things that are popping up. This bio-based materials, how people are looking at ways to look at materials differently, algae-based systems, looking at different types of renewable energies, electric cars, like all of these things together, and finding where the gaps are and trying to create a pathway to use these materials long-term is going to help us in this trajectory. But I think that there's so much more on the infrastructure and the innovation side that needs to be brought to light so that we don't have to look at things from a perspective of we're going to wait until something bad happens and then make a self-correction. I think we need to look at systematically, how do we begin to look at gradually moving the needle in the appropriate direction and everyone having a role within that particular process. And that's going to allow us to be able to do a better job of moving toward a more circular economy.
What is encouraging that you're seeing right now at that systemic level? Certainly, I think we see a lot of young consumers, right? We have millennials and Gen Z saying you have to do better. And that really all by itself, I think, is a powerful driver. But what do you see from the system side? I mean, it's pretty hard to break our, just, one simple example, our addiction to plastic, not to mention the fact that the oil and gas industry are saying, certainly the oil industry is saying, at least this is somewhere that our oil can go if everyone buys EVs. Like, you have a lot of powerful competing forces here, obviously. And I don't want to bring us down. I want to say what's working.
Well, if I may jump in on that, I think really important to keep in mind that when we think about where we are today and the way the world's economy works today and where we may like to get to and what we envision when we talk about a circular economy, it's not going to be a straight line and it's not going to be a smooth journey there. So there will be trade-offs and there will be periods of time where we are perhaps doing things in a slightly less linear way, but still not a more circular way. Plastic is a great example of that. It's, I think, really encouraging that there is now a very strong, I think, truly global awareness of the challenge of plastic. It's also an incredible material that has brought with it some important advantages and really supported a way of life and a quality of life for many that has been really transformative. So important to be careful about not sort of demonizing plastic. At the same time, this global awareness of the challenges, of the problems, a recognition that it's not going to go away anytime soon. But the foundation, I think, has been at the center of some really compelling work around the new plastics economy. So getting many of the world's largest organizations to make commitments and publicly disclose their progress against those commitments towards reducing their use of virgin materials, towards increasing the recycled content of their products, towards piloting and demonstrating new technologies and new services that reduce their plastic footprint. So I'm encouraged by the progress in the plastic space, but at the same time, it is a huge problem. And if you think about a world where we have a healthier relationship with plastic and where we've perhaps slowed or even removed the problem of plastic waste in the ocean, for example, getting there is not going to be a smooth journey. It's not going to be a straight line. It's going to be unpredictable as well. And a lot of the breakthroughs and a lot of the great successes are going to come from places that we're not aware of and spaces we can't see yet. So I'm encouraged, but I think just keeping in mind what this journey is going to be, how long it's going to take, and what that experience is going to be like is really important.
Molly, one of the things that was really interesting, I was having a conversation with a group of friends the other day, and one of my buddies was like, "Hey, man, you're into this sustainability stuff, man. You just we should just cut out all plastics and get back to things. I was like, well, tell me what you were going to do during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. How are you going to be vaccinated? Think about all the vaccines that went out. That was all inside of plastic syringes. Like, how would you make that happen? Like, there's value in the material. So, like, condemning materials is not what circular economy is about. Mm-hmm. What circular economy is about is how do you create materials and manage materials in a way that allow you to keep them in a technical loop if they're made from a technical process. And if they're made from a natural loop, then they will absolutely go back into nature. Nature does a great job. It's the most resilient system that you've ever seen actually perform. I think that some of the opportunities that we're going to see to Nick's innovation point, nature has gotten it right for a long time, according to Janine Benes in her biomimicry book. Like, nature has been doing some things amazingly. The spider web is tougher than Kevlar. Like, there's things that are out there that we can learn from. And I think that people are beginning to explore that and look for ways to create some things. You're starting to see designers create materials called like the Bionic Yarns that Pharrell came up with raw for the oceans. Started his own plastic bottle recycling company, started pulling in plastic bottles in North Carolina and making clothing from it. And like I told my daughter, and selling t-shirts for $70. Like, so there was economic and sustainable solutions there, but it was financially challenging. But it was really interesting to see that whole mindset of thinking about taking something that was a problem and turning it into a designer's choice of materials to create a pathway for people expressing themselves through their clothing or through, and I think that more and more of that type of strategic thinking, that type of circular thinking, that type of systematic thinking is going to be manifested as a result of some pressures that will come. I think that it will be a result of people who have mindsets where these millennials are now beginning to be managers and directors in leadership positions in these organizations and pushing a little bit harder and having the ability to press the concepts of sustainability and circularity a little bit more, and organizations like the NGOs that are really out there connecting businesses with these innovation hubs. Like, that is one of the gaps that's been around for a long time. And I think that some of the NGOs that are out there now are really looking at this as an opportunity to bridge that gap between the infrastructure and the innovation that's needed with the companies that have the ability to connect with them, empower, and become a little bit more connected to circularity in a different way. And I think that those things are happening. They're not happening as fast as they should, but they are happening bit by bit. And every little incremental effort towards circularity is always a victory in my mind. So when I see little things and I read little articles, some people may look at it as a small advancement, but I think that some of these things, as you begin to look at creative opportunities and innovations that happen, are directly connected to organizations that are out there really fighting for the purpose-driven work of creating a circular economy.
Sounds like we had a traumatic error here, folks. We're going to try again.
Is if you have not walked in nature in a while, just get out and walk in nature, because nature has figured it out. They have the best systematic work. Tree falls, ants take stuff from the tree.
If you just walk in nature, you can experience just little small things that we take for granted, things that we don't absorb the way that we used to. One of the things, I grew up in a small town, Opelika, Alabama, and I was a grandmother's baby. Like, I used to know when it was going to rain just by sitting outside. Now you got to look at all these apps, the weather thing. I knew when it was going to rain just because you can hear the winds change. You can feel the breeze difference. You can feel the temperature drop. There are certain things that you knew. The other thing was, and she used to tell me this, animals are always smarter than us. You know when it's going to rain when they're not out, because they're smart enough to go and hide before the storms come. So I think that just being in tune with nature and stop separating ourselves from it. We've become an inside culture where we are not in tune with nature, and we have to be a part of nature. We are not separate from it. I think that those are things that we can do, small, incremental, just little bitty things that we can think about differently. And I think that if we did those things, then recycling would come easy, because you would see it. You would know why it's important, because you're connected to something bigger. Ourselves in creating this aspect of individualism versus collectively looking at our value as a society toward nature. And I think that those are things that are critically underlying important to the things that Nick said that we sometimes lose context of.
George Bandy and Nick Engineer, thanks so much for the time today.
Thank you.
Up next, Design Challenge, the art of innovation. And now, Design Challenge, the art of innovation, with Maxine Beda, Gordon Holliday, Sophia Lee, Raymond Randall, and Celine Simon.
Well, Maxine, I'm so grateful for you carving out some time to speak with us today. We've been talking about circularity, and I think it's a perfect topic to relate to the fashion industry. Super excited to have you here today, and would love for you to just kind of take a minute and talk about kind of what was your background in fashion, and how did you kind of evolve to starting the New Standard Institute and what you do there?
Sure. So I took a bit of a roundabout path to get where I am today. My background is actually in law. I was working at the United Nations and also doing corporate law as well. And I did a stint at the Rwandan Criminal Tribunal. And it was actually there that I was first, I grew up in Minnesota, which is, the home to the largest mall in the United States. So I knew that side of how things were sold to me, but it was the first kind of opportunity that I had to really see how things were made. And I remember just going to visit a town where baskets were made, and it was, so silly, but I just remember thinking like, oh, wow, baskets are made by reeds, which grow by rivers. And I think to me, that was just such a fascinating world. And that really has obviously been my interest going forward, is like, how are things even made, and how do they get to us, and what is that relationship like? And that then led me to start a fashion company where we were telling the story of how goods were produced, how the clothing that we made was produced. And I realized from that experience that media and other fashion companies were really interested in that story. They really, wanted to know more about how their products were being made and telling that story. And then really, from there, it was, as we got all of these inquiries, it became, well, if we really want to make the most positive impact, maybe that role is not to create more things, but to help the industry with just clear information on what the impact of the industry is and where we can go to have really measurable progress. And so that was the journey to then start the New Standard Institute.
Well, and I think you've kind of taken that to the next step too, because you have your new book out, Unraveled. And I think one of the things I really appreciated reading through that is we've all heard sort of the big numbers and stats around sort of the environmental impact of the industry. But what I love about your approach in that book is you really add just some really beautiful color behind those numbers and telling the stories of the people involved in each one of those links in the supply chain. I'd love to hear just a little bit about sort of the impetus for writing that book and some of the adventures and the travels that took you all over the world to really kind of dig into each of those links in the supply chain. I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
It started in the cotton fields of Texas. The journey was tracing a pair of jeans from their, the cotton field all the way to a landfill in Ghana. So it started off in Texas, visiting with farmers and understanding kind of the challenges that they face, and then moved from there, went to China to see where that cotton then goes, and visited several mills. And then from there, I went to Bangladesh and Sri Lanka to see where that textile is then cut and sewn into the garment that we would know. And then went back to the US to both speak to a lot of shoppers about their own relationship to clothing, went to a distribution facility to understand kind of how that whole process works, since so much of our shopping is done online these days. And then went to a Salvation Army to understand what happens when we donate our clothing. And then kind of following the end of that journey for the book was to Ghana, to a place called Contamanta Market, which is one of the big secondhand clothing markets globally, which is where a lot of our clothing, European clothing that is donated, ends up, and went to a landfill then that I really got to see from beginning to end our whole clothing journey.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because I think as consumers, we first interact with the garment once it's on the rack at the store, on the web page, on the website. We don't have any clue about what's happened before that. What are some of the sort of big takeaways that you had from doing that research that consumers may not be aware of in terms of the impact of the fashion industry?
Yeah, there are a few kind of big headline numbers to think about. I think one on the climate change front is just how significant this industry is. Reports come out from anywhere from 4 to about 8% of total global greenhouse gas emissions are coming from this one industry. And I think it's really important to understand where that's coming from, because it's happening at the textile mill, which is where that fiber is being converted into a textile. It takes a lot of heat to do that. And we're doing that in places like China, which is still really a coal-based power grid. So, just the greenhouse gas emissions alone are significant. And then there are other significant issues, because apparel now is predominantly synthetics. The microplastic pollution that, we continue to see new studies of the challenges that are being faced there. Apparel is a leading contributor to that microplastic pollution as well.
Yeah, and I think, the brands and retailers seem to be coming into sort of greater awareness of the impact of that. And there seems to be certainly a lot of NGOs that are working on this and addressing this, and certain consumers, I think, are becoming aware of this. And given all the innovations and technologies that seem to be emerging, there's almost like this perfect storm of opportunity to really kind of capitalize on all those forces to help shift that supply chain from its kind of traditional and linear model to a much more circular model.
There's still more awareness that needs to be done and more interest, but the delta is there, and I think that's the important and exciting thing. What I find interesting, because I get the benefit of being able to speak to both the farmers and to waste management, is that there is an advanced kind of understanding that each separate industry is not working in a silo, but is part of the system. And then I think from the citizen side, the engaged people in the space are really looking to slow down their consumption of clothing, and have a better connection, a more positive relationship with their own wardrobes. And I think that's an exciting front. If we can really connect the dots on the innovation that's happening on textile recycling, and focus in on the hot spots of carbon emissions, and then have citizens and people reconnect with their wardrobes, and kind of move away from that disposable fashion system, well, that's a recipe for success. And I think that's kind of the exciting future to work towards.
From where we sit in the supply chain, right, we tend to look at business models in terms of, do we have the ability to collect something? Do we have the ability to process it? And is there an end market for that?
Yeah, I think we're going to need a shift on all fronts. There's exciting innovation in business models, and repair as an innovation. Yeah. And then there is, innovation that's coming forward on the actual textile recycling, as you mentioned, both chemical and physical, mechanical recycling. We're going to need, and then from our perspective, from just the carbon hotspot, innovations in financial innovations, and innovations in green energy to address the carbon hotspot in the industry. So, we're seeing movement on all of these fronts, and it's our work and the work of everybody, including the great work that you guys are doing, to make that shift, so that we're building that circular system that is about reusing, reducing, and recycling. And I think that when we get all of those boxes checked, that's a very exciting future to look forward to.
As this transitions towards more circularity, typically, most people, wherever they sit in the supply chain, they've got good relationships, one link up and one link down in the supply chain, and that's about it. And I know just from my own experience, as we've started to stick our toes in the textile recycling world to figure out how we can really lean into this more, we're having conversations with people all up and down the value chain in this. And I don't know that there was a perceived need for those conversations by anybody in the supply chain before, but we're really being welcomed into a lot of conversations at various points in the supply chain that I think is really encouraging and hopefully leads to some really great collaborations. We're going to be talking a little bit later about a design challenge that we did working with actual fashion designers, trying to take end of use considerations in mind as they were going through the design of their fashion. So it just seems like there's a lot more collaboration that's starting to take place in the industry. And I think that's going to be really key to help continue that shift towards more circularity.
I think what I was trying to get across in Unraveled and through the work of the New Standard Institute is just how connected these decisions are. And sometimes one part of the system can think that they're doing something great, but there's unintended consequences for that decision. And so I think the more that the value chain is connected, the more learnings that we can have from that. It's connecting those dots as a system that we're really going to find the solutions that we need to find.
If you had to give a few nuggets of suggestions of how people can be more responsible with their use of fashion, purchases of fashion, end of use management, what do you see as some of the biggest things people can do to really help kind of minimize the environmental footprint of their own role in the fashion industry?
Yeah, I mean, this might come as a surprising answer, but it's to love your clothes. Yeah. I think we tend to focus in on sort of what are the technologies that we can go to, but the biggest way to reduce your impact is to extend the life of the clothing that you have. It's not something that should be guilt-inducing of like, oh, I don't know what is the most sustainable thing that I can buy. The most sustainable thing is the one that you're going to wear the most. So go out and really, get something that you're going to love and enjoy, and then wear it a lot.
What are the things that give you the greatest hope that this industry can really make this shift?
I think it's all of the above, really. It's really seeing that there is this shift. Millennials and Gen Z are very interested in resale. They are more aware than any time before about the impacts of this industry.
Yeah.
And so there's a real interest in this shift. And then, likewise, the industry itself is connecting the dots and trying to focus. There are players really focusing in on innovations across the space, and coming up with helpful financial tools to work with their partners to make these sort of environmental upgrades. I think that's a really key part of this that's just emerging. And then there, the regulatory environment, I think, is also shifting to coming up with a helpful common standards, so that the industry, a brand, a company does not have to be at a competitive disadvantage for doing the right thing.
What's the biggest sort of need that we're not addressing, that we're not paying enough attention to yet, or there's not been enough focus on innovations and technologies to help solve that?
Well, I think as as we see companies making progress, we also see emerging, business models that are going in the opposite direction. I think we do have to be aware and mindful of that we can't have, these business models proliferating that are intended for users to only wear a garment once or twice. And then I think from just a carbon perspective, there are some companies doing really interesting and exciting work in coming up with helpful financial tools for their suppliers to make these green upgrades. But we really need to see sort of more of that in the space to address the carbon hotspot of this industry.
Well, Maxine, this has been really, really pleasurable conversation. I've learned so much from you, as I knew I would. I'm very grateful for you spending some time with us today and sharing your perspectives with us. So thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much. It was great to talk to you.
Yeah, and so much of what you talked about is really sort of a perfect segue into what we're going to be talking about next in our design challenge, and really the need for that design challenge to really be working further upstream in the supply chain and making sure there's great collaboration. So I think you've kind of teed this up perfectly for us today. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm so excited about this conversation. I've really been looking forward to it and excited to talk about the design challenge. So as we get started to talk about this design challenge, I want to make sure everybody's aware of your background specifically. And so why don't each of you just take a minute and explain your roles with the different organizations and your backgrounds in the fashion space. Celine, why don't you go first?
Thank you so much, Raymond. My name is Celine Sman, as you said. I'm one of the co-founders of the Slow Factory. We are partly a school and partly a lab. We work primarily in the fashion industry, but we try to work across all industries. That's why we are partnered here with waste management. We work at the intersection of environmental justice and human rights, and we work across all sectors, as I just said, and waste to resource and waste-led design is one of the main sectors that we like to work in.
Yeah, you guys do some amazing work. Thank you. Sophia?
Thank you, Raymond. I am Sophia Lee, and I'm proudly on the board of directors of Slow Factory. And with Slow Factory, we've done so many projects together. One of them was landfills as museums that we worked with waste management on. My background is in journalism, was a former editor at American Vogue, and also host Meta, Facebook's podcast, Climate Talks.
Yeah, awesome. And Celine, Sophia mentioned the Landfill with Design project. Talk for a little bit about the prior project that we've done with Slow Factory.
Of course, yes. As Sophia mentioned, landfills as museums is one of our core programs at the Slow Factory, where we take designers, students, and anyone interested in designing products to landfills, essentially, as a field trip. And the idea is to take designers to the end of life of products that they design. And so when they walk on these piles and piles of all sorts of products that they've used throughout their day or that they've potentially designed themselves, there's a cognitive shift that happens in the minds of designers where they start to understand that waste is not something that just vanishes away. It doesn't just go away. There is no away. And it ends up somewhere. And the idea of this program is to build a framework around waste-led design solutions. One of them is to use waste as a resource, for example, and so on. Yeah, so that's one of the programs we did together.
Yeah, that was a really fascinating project. I was honored to work with you guys on that. And it was just really interesting to see that perspective change that you mentioned of the students when they really thought more broadly about what happens at the products they're designing at end of use and how to start kind of connecting the dots with making products more sustainable and more circular in the long run. So it was a really great product. And so that, as you said, was kind of the impetus for this design challenge, was really trying to figure out how do we have much more collaborative conversations with different points in the supply chain so that we can assure that products are designed with end of use in mind. Talk a little bit about kind of how that process came about to really formulate this design challenge and what the goals of that were.
With the WM Design Challenge, the program was slightly different, where we created a call for proposal for all designers to apply, and mainly students. We were mainly looking for emerging designers and students to apply with an idea of using waste as a resource or applying waste-led design methodologies to their work.
That's so frequently how it is. How do you think these students and designers in this program will be able to parlay their experience from this into the real world of fashion?
Oh, I mean, I think that already every challenge that they've had during this process, they're already applying it to the real world. It's not just like this hypothetical, oh, here's a challenge and now you have to do it, but they actually are using these challenges and creating products and creating content for the product's narrative, brand identity, showcasing them at pop-up markets, showcasing them on social media, selling them. So everything that they've already learned is already being applied to the real world. And I think that's something Slow Factory has excelled at, is just bridging that gap between what is just a design student learning and also applying it to the real world.
Yeah, so true. So, Sophia, how has this shaped your thoughts on the role that youth can play in the future of fashion? And Celine, I want to hear your answer to this too after Sophia.
Yeah, I think the future of fashion is these designers, 100%. And I think that a lot of times we get siloed into what design needs to be, what a designer is. Like, they need to have a brand and seasons and all these very rigid things that the fashion industry has already predictated. And as a former editor of a magazine, I very much saw that designers felt like they had to follow this very rigid rule book. And now it's like, no, all the rules have gone out the window. These designers can not be seasonless, only use waste-led design if they want to, only do a specific product if they want to. They don't need to consistently be churning out these collections 13 seasons a year or whatever. So I think the future of fashion is in the hands of them, is that everything goes, and waste-led design and upcycling, all of that is just the norm now.
Yeah. Celine, how did the design challenge shape your thoughts on the role of youth and the future of fashion?
Well, Raymond, we have been working on this project together, but prior to that, the Slow Factory has been championing waste-led design as a solution for over 10 years now, with using waste as a new resource. And for us, observing and witnessing the evolution that the designers were going through from an idea to an execution supported by their advisors. For example, in the case of Natasha Mays, her solution, her technology, through this program, she was facing, for example, a crossroad. Does she go towards the industry and develop an industry solution, or should she go towards design and developing a brand? And just observing their evolution through the program and the different paths that they could be taking with waste-led design solutions just proved to me that the industry is not just ready, it is starving for these types of innovations that are looking at waste as a new resource, looking at the end of life first, And so for me, it just provided me so much hope. There's so much potential, and there is also a lot of opportunities in that space.
That's great. I love the phrase that the industry is starving for solutions. And so hopefully consumers are awakening to that as well and starting to think about that differently. If you had to think, Celine, about sort of your biggest insight or takeaway from the design challenge, what would that be?
Well, our biggest insight with the design challenge is that we need more of this. Definitely. There isn't enough of these types of programs. We could see it from the applications that we've received, to the attention the media has given this program, to as well the brands that have reached out to some of the designers for collaborations. These solutions are not just niche, they are needed at scale. And what we've seen is that making waste-led design solutions cool, making them accessible, making them desirable, and making them a design solution, and just proving that they are in fact a design solution, just showed us how much that is needed in the industry.
Sophia, what was your biggest highlight or insight from serving as an advisor during the design challenge?
Yeah, I think immediately what came to mind was 100% we need more of these programs. We need more slow factories. We need more waste management collaborations, bridging this gap between design and waste and bringing it to the masses and making that the norm. But also just that I think that fashion used to be very top down, like a few very certain designers and brands would dictate everything. And now that's completely, again, has been rerouted, and it's completely been just a free market for all. And I think that not only is the industry starving for this kind of solutions, but the consumer is as well. And consumers, they can dictate what they want, and they don't have to wait for brands to be putting it out into the market.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful. So often we don't have the collaboration that's really needed to transition a supply chain to a much more circular supply chain. So I think these kinds of projects and the conversations that have ensued from it are really critical to changing how this industry operates. I want to ask each of you one last question, and that is, what gives you hope about the future of youth and fashion after working on this design challenge? I'll start with you, Celine.
Well, as you know, for us at the Slow Factory, hope is a verb. Hope is action. And so, what has shown me that we can have hope is to see more and more of these powerful, positive actions taken in a bold way from brands, from organizations like Waste Management, from governmental organizations, non-governmental organizations. We really need everyone at the table, and we need everyone to take on a bold, powerful step towards climate positive solutions. That's what gives me hope.
So true, so true. Sophia, what gives you hope about the future of fashion and youth?
Well, Sayo and Gordon, I mean, all of them, they give me so much hope because they're thinking radically, they're thinking outside of the systems that are already in place. And I think that right now everyone thinks it's a really scary, wild time because there's a lot of systems collapsing, but destruction precedes creation. So the more that's destroyed, the more that we can just build a more sturdier and more cohesive and inclusive foundation. It's just like a house. If the foundation itself is rotting, then it's like, let's tear it all down and build it up completely, and this time bring everyone in.
Yeah, I have a friend whose tagline for his business says, all wastes are assets in disguise. And I think that's so true. And there's this shift taking place where we're learning to think about materials so differently than we used to. And I think that's going to play a really critical role in the fashion world and helping shift it from such a linear supply chain to a much more circular industry. So excited to see that happen, and excited about the role that the Design Challenge had on this and the impact that you two had on all the participants in this. So I want to say thank you guys again for your dedication and the time and effort and expertise you poured into all the participants in this, and for making this such a great project.
And thank you, Raymond, and thanks to Waste Management for really believing in this idea and making it happen. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Raymond, and Waste Management for supporting this and just uplifting this whole new generation of designers with Slow Factory. I can't wait to see this program continue for years to come.
Yeah, it was such a great program. Loved working on it with you guys. Thank you so much for your help in all this. Appreciate it. Thanks for the conversation today too, and for sharing this with everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye-bye. And up next, Sophia is going to talk with one of the program participants about their experience in the program.
Okay, hello. My name is Sophia Lee, and I am an advisor for the Waste Management Design Challenge with Slow Factory. I'm so excited to have Gordon Holiday here. He is one of the Design Challenge students. Gordon, what's going on? What led you to the fashion world?
Hey, what's going on, Sophia? Happy to be here. And definitely what's really got me here into the fashion world is really as a middle schooler, I would say that was really the intro for me. Going to a middle school back in Baltimore, Maryland, where I'm from, that was an environment where we all came from uniform schools. So, you know, you can imagine back then wearing navy polos and khaki slacks. Everyone kind of looked the same in a sense. We're going to school, we all kind of looked the same. But it wasn't until high school where, you know, we didn't have to wear uniforms anymore. We can express ourselves and we could, you know, wear whatever type of clothing styles that we wanted to. And at that time, we're talking about like 2007, you know, you have all these great brands that are coming out at that time. And, you know, one of the biggest things was like Karma Loop and East Bay and Urban Outfitters. So we're all just shopping and getting all these great brands online. And that really gave me a curiosity into fashion.
So have you always been interested in sustainability?
Definitely. It's funny. I didn't really give it that name though. That wasn't really something that popped onto my radar as far as a specific name. I used to always really just design out of necessity. So I would take whatever was available to me and, you know, kind of turn trash from treasure, as they say. But I would just find old blankets sitting around in my house, or I would find, you know, like these scarves or old jackets or military jackets that some of my family members may have had. And I would cut those up and remake them and add patches and put these different embellishments on there.
I love that. I loved what you said about sustainability was first and foremost a necessity, because that's how it started with, you know, our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation. Sustainability was the norm. It was a necessity. And now it's this new frontier thought. I wanted to ask you, so how did you even hear about the design challenge?
You know, I'm thinking, okay, I love designing cool stuff, but like, what's my purpose as a designer? What do I want to serve? What's my democratic duty to the people as a designer? What problem am I trying to solve? My friend said, hey, I know, you know, you're waiting on a response, but I think you should check this out. And she sent me the Slow Factory website. So I said, wait a minute, this is exactly what I've been looking for. You know, this is crazy. When the classes started, I just started taking the classes, taking notes. I was working a full-time job at the time. So when I would get off of work, I would just come home and, you know, register or log in to be ready for the next class. And so by the time I think we got towards the ending of the semester, I saw the post for the Waste Management Design Challenge. So I drew some drawings up and, you know, I kind of told a story that I was really getting personally attached to at that time. And I just submitted it and, you know, knocked on wood, crossed my fingers and just, you know, hope that everything would go right. And ended up going very well. And I ended up being one of the recipients for the Waste Management Design Challenge.
What was that personal story that you submitted? I'm just curious to hear that.
Definitely. It was a story I heard about the first African samurai named Yasuke. I thought the story was very interesting because I of course, I love Japanese culture. You know, if you look at my brand, you can see a lot of the influence that comes from there. And, you know, it's like, since I was a kid, I've been watching, you know, anime and my uncle, actually my great uncle, he was very cultured. He was well-traveled. So he would introduce me to different things from different cultures. And that's one of the stories that I wanted to tell, not only just from, you know, the narrative, but also merging in some of the traditional Japanese techniques that are used, such as the sashiko and burrow. One of the biggest quilting styles that come from Japan. I wanted to merge these worlds together and just reimagine what would this look like in 2021. And that was the basis, the start of that collection.
Wow. And is that the collection that you're continuing for the design challenge?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. I can't wait to see the end results. So how are you using your design challenge experiences in the real world?
With the wonderful mentors that I have, I've been educated in just multiple different parts of the fashion industry, and just learning about logistics, for example, and how, you should mark things that are coming into your space, and then how you're putting those things back out there in the circular economy. I've been educated on design practices. I've been also educated on the education part, the teaching, the work, going into the community, going into schools and educating, the younger generation about what's going on, because they're going to be the ones that's passing the next torch. So with all the mentors that I have, I've been finding more ways to go into schools and speak. I've been finding more ways to do workshops and having panel discussions have revolved around that. And then also even doing donation drive.
Are you doing anything that's new or regenerative yourself in your design work at the moment?
I like to find ways where I take one or I take multiple different materials, such as 4 t-shirts, a hoodie, and a vest. And I find out how many ways I can break that down until I get to like scraps. And even if I get down to that scrap, what else I could use that for, such as polyfill, or for upholstery, or if I'm doing like some type of furniture design, like using that as stuffing, or even if I make like a teddy bear or something that can go back and introduce, like how can I break these materials down, so I get to that one core essence of just little bits and pieces of materials. And I find that very fun for me. And I think that's something also I want to introduce into my workshops too, and just get people's mind thinking, okay, this is a regenerative form, because yes, we were going to throw this away, but now we're bringing it back in, and it's being used.
Yeah, I love that. Everything is a resource. Like everything can serve a purpose and be reused and is a resource for something else. So that brings me to my last question. What do you think your relationship with waste will be in the future? Or will there maybe not even be waste if it's a resource?
Yeah. I'm a hopeful optimist.
Same. Yeah.
Right. When I was taking the Slow Factory classes or open education classes, it gave me a lot of a larger perspective, right? It made me think like, okay, wow, the fashion industry is one of the top 5 pollutants. There's 148 billion ton problem. It would be kind of far-fetched for me to think like I could be the only one that could solve that. But I always say, if you have one sustainable designer and they're able to teach 100 people, now you have 101. So it's a new approach, right? It's they're having their hands in the problem, and we're all looking for a nearby solution. So with waste, I feel like there's going to be so many new technologies and so many new ways to approach it. But I would love to see a world where we can get to a zero waste. And I think you can make sustainability cool. You can make it aesthetically pleasing. So that's the challenge for me. Like, let's introduce this in a cool way.
Yeah, I love all of that. That resonates with me so much. Like, let's make sustainability so cool where it's like the trendiest thing, where we don't even need trends anymore, because that's the norm.
It's every day. It's lifestyle.
Yeah, exactly. It's the norm. And I think that is the direction we're heading to. And, we're not even calling waste anymore. Like you're not calling waste. It's materials, it's a resource into your design. So I think that it will shift so much. I'm so looking forward to that.
Definitely. I like to say one man's excess is another man's access.
Yes. Right? Yes. Keep throwing those out. I love that. Thank you so much, Gordon, for chatting with me today. I learned so much, and I can't wait to see your final designs from the design challenge.
I appreciate that, Sophia. Thank you. It's been great talking to you today.
If you're interested in learning more about our designers, head to wm.com/design challenge and click on the Meet Our Designers tab for more information and videos. To hear directly from them, tune into Slow Factory's Open EDU course, which will be on February 25th at 12 Eastern Time. You can head to Slow Factory's Open EDU site to register for the course and to get an inside look at our participants' process and progress. This is a time of incredible change in our priorities, in how we live, and how we work, and in our sense of responsibilities to the world. As we've seen, today's youth will change fashion and textiles forever, not just collection and styles, but across the entire supply chain. And I'm so encouraged to see this. I know WM is excited to have its collective sleeves rolled up working on this, and we hope each of you will join us in rolling your sleeves up and playing your role in helping us shift the supply chain towards greater circularity.
Up next, social impact, speaking up.
In a typical year, hundreds of thousands of people attend the WM Phoenix Open Golf Tournament. It's one of the largest spectator events in the country. But here's the cool part. From this massive event, not a single scrap of waste ends up in a landfill. How is that possible? Through a process that makes sure all materials go to their next best use. It's called zero waste. Here's how it works. Let's take this cup. Most cups like this are made from polystyrene foam, but this one is made from sugarcane fiber, cornstarch, and recycled fiber. And because there are no trash cans at a zero waste event, once this cup is used, it gets tossed into a compost bin. The bins are emptied and all the stuff in them gets sorted, measured, and documented. As you can imagine, this part of the process involves some cool technology and a lot of dedicated people. Everything that's thrown away by all those thousands of people is repurposed in one of four ways: recycling, composting, donation, energy recovery. All the event vendors and partners follow sustainability requirements to make sure packaging, food service, signage, operations, decor, and more can all be used again. And just to make sure WM really hits that zero waste standard, a third party validates the entire process. So was all this effort really worth it? In 2020, the WM Phoenix Open recycled 62.5% of its waste, composted 22.5%, donated 2.2%, and sent any plastic bags in your recycling bin, and don't put your recyclables in plastic bags. Okay, we have a lot of stuff here, so let's get into it. One easy way to know if something can be recycled is to look at its shape. Yeah, these bottles, jars, jugs, and tubs can all be recycled. Just give them a rinse and make sure they're dry. The same goes for these cans that are made out of aluminum, tin, and steel. Paper, magazines, and newspaper, all good to recycle. Yeah, you can put cardboard and paperboard in a recycling bin too. Even pizza boxes. Make sure all cardboard boxes are recycled, are flat. Our rules for juice boxes and other food containers can vary by city, county, and state. So before you say yeah to recycling those containers, check with your local program. All right, time for a speed round. Here's a quick breakdown of what can and cannot be recycled. These recycling arrows don't always mean yeah. You got to pay attention to the details to know if it's actually recyclable or not. How about all these plastic cups, disposable utensils, all this kind of stuff? That's a nope. Plastic bags are a nope for your curbside recycling bin, but they can often go in recycling bins at big box and grocery stores. Stuff you're not sure about and hope will get sorted out later, that's a nope. This is wish cycling, not recycling, and can be expensive, wasteful, and dangerous. This is why it's so important to always recycle right and follow those golden rules of recycling. Here's some notes. Hoses, propane tanks, Christmas lights, all this stuff can damage recycling equipment and hurt the crew. Yeah, glass is recyclable, but it depends on location. Check in with your local recycling program for that. Bottles, jars, jugs, and tubs that have been cleaned out and are dry, that's a yeah. You did it. You're an expert now. Okay, maybe not an expert, but hey, you do know how to recycle right. Learn more about recycling right by checking out these Will It Recycle videos. And thanks for always working with WM for a sustainable tomorrow. This pair of sneakers started out looking like this. So did this shirt, these jeans, and this backpack, and even this purse. All of this is made from recycled materials. WM and Reprieve have made it possible to transform over 20 billion bottles into amazing things we use every day. But how? How does this turn into this? Let's find out. Each year, 35 billion plastic bottles are on the way. That's about 5 bottles for every human on Earth. And each of those bottles would take 1,000 years to degrade. This is how WM and Reprieve work together for a more sustainable tomorrow. Your recycling is picked up by WM, and that material is delivered to a WM facility where everything gets sorted. Plastic is separated from cardboard, along with aluminum and other recyclable materials. Each type of material is packed into bales and shipped to various facilities to be turned into something new. Let's talk plastic bottles, for example. Millions of them are delivered to North Carolina, where Unify, the makers of Reprieve, operates one of the most advanced recycling facilities in the country. This is where bottles become yarn. Once the bottles arrive at the facility, they are sorted and cleaned. They get chopped up, melted, and blended to become Reprieve recycled flake. These flakes are loaded into massive silos where they begin a state-of-the-art process, which transforms them into polyester fibers. But not just any kind of polyester. This is super high quality, high performing fiber that can help protect against moisture, control temperature and odor, and deliver amazing cushioning. Then what? The bottles that WM provides are turned into millions of miles worth of yarn that's used by brands you know and love to create some amazing products. WM and Reprieve can make what seems impossible a reality.
Waste management has been very successful in their ability to collect different types of waste, and that's where we step in. We become that solution in terms of giving that bottle that second life.
We see ourselves as a company that helps brands meet their sustainable goals. We help brands achieve something that they thought was impossible.
Best of all, this innovative collaboration gives plastic a second life. So far, WM and Reprieve have taken 20 billion of these and given them a new life. And you can help by making sure your recyclables are empty and rinsed before putting them in your bin. And by buying products made from recycled material. When you think about it, this process starts and ends with you. And all of us can work together for a sustainable tomorrow.
And now, Social Impact, Speaking Up, with Vic Barrett, Sophia Kiani, and Matthew Tejada.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew Tejada. I'm the Director of the Office of Environmental Justice for the United States Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, D.C. I'm joined by Vic Barrett. Vic is fighting hard for a future for all of us. We're also joined by Sophia Kiani. Sophia is an Iranian-American environmentalist studying climate change and public policy at Stanford. Maybe, Vic, if you want to start out, how did you first kind of get activated around ideas of justice?
I think a lot of my experience in after-school programs kind of kicked off most of what I knew about the social justice implications of climate change. I joined this after-school program called the Human Rights Activist Project. And I remember when we were first told we were going to be working on climate change, I was a little confused as to what that had to do with human rights. But after sitting in a room with a lot of other people who looked like me and had some of the shared lived experience of having intersectional identities, maybe being first generation, maybe being Latino or Black or Indigenous, all experiences I relate to, I realized that people who look like me or who have intersectional identities are people who are on the front lines all over the world.
And Sophia, how did you first come into really being an activist for environmental justice?
When I was in middle school, I took a trip to Iran, which is my parents' home country. And while I was there, I was struck by how horrible pollution was. This was right on the heels of my first class in 6th grade about climate change. And so I decided to do research on climate change in the Middle East. And I learned that temperatures there were rising more than twice the global average. And so this was all really scary to me. And I decided to approach my relatives and to ask them what they thought. But I was horrified and saddened to hear that they didn't know anything about climate change. And so at 12 years old, I knew more than the adults around me who I often turned to for advice. And so I realized that part of that reason was because of a lack of climate education in Iran available in Farsi, which is Iran's native language, which is why I decided to start my nonprofit, Climate Cardinals, where we translate climate resources and education into over 100 languages, because I really believe that everyone everywhere has the power to be a climate activist, and it's just a matter of having adequate resources.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a big part of my job at EPA. We provide a lot of grants to community-based organizations and tribal organizations all over the United States. A lot of those organizations are using those grants to, go out there and advocate and push for policy change and push for cleanups. But a lot of them are just out there educating, because that education in the community, getting the community organized, getting the community aware of what's going on, and getting the community to really raise its voice, is such a critical first step. All right, so Vic, you've recently been taking your actions more in a legislative kind of policy direction pathway. Can you take us through kind of what you're looking at in terms of the advocacy you're now pointing at government institutions and laws, and what are you trying to achieve by looking at more of a legislative strategy?
So since I was the first campaign I actually worked on, which was exciting to hear you both talk about climate education, was to try to mandate climate education in New York City public schools, K through 12. Because I felt like if I wanted to be part of an active youth movement, young people actually needed to know all the implications of climate change, which is woefully undertaught in public schools across the country. So after getting involved in that and spending a lot of time, especially in high school, trying to convince legislators that I couldn't necessarily vote for in the next election cycle to do things that matter to me, I eventually got this really awesome opportunity to join Juliana versus the United States, which is a federal constitutional lawsuit against the US federal government, basically asking and pointing out the fact that the US government has known since the 1950s that climate catastrophe would come with an increased use of fossil fuels, and directly and actively ignored that evidence despite the risk that it posed for posterity. So that's a case that I've been on for about 6 years now and has been moving through the courts over time. Sometimes I joke that we're not going to all be youth plaintiffs anymore by the time that it's over.
We used to sue the United States government quite a bit, including the EPA. I was actually, one of the lawsuits I was on, by the time it finished, I was already at EPA. I was actually, I stood right over Administrator Gina McCarthy's shoulder when she was signing the final order based upon a lawsuit that I had filed quite a long time before then. So right on. It takes a lot of different strategies, a lot of different tactics to advocate for justice across everything that's going on. I know, like, you were very much focused, like you were already talking about, the educational piece and then that organizing piece. I know you started this organization called Climate Cardinals. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you started that and kind of where it is today?
So when I was a senior in high school, I decided to start Climate Cardinals. So at the time, it was just me and my mom, and we were working to translate climate resources into Farsi to educate my relatives. But I basically had a dream where other young people from all over the country, all over the world, could translate climate resources in exchange for community service hours. And so I decided to contact a number of different climate organizations, and I was able to form like a fiscal sponsorship under a larger organization. And so we were able to give young people community service hours for the work that they would do for us. And so the first day that we launched, we actually had a viral TikTok video that reached over 100,000 people. And so over 1,000 young people signed up to work with us. And so since then, since around like 2 years ago when I started it, I'm now like a sophomore in college. We've grown to over 8,000 volunteers in 40 plus countries. And we've translated over 500,000 words of climate resources into 100 languages. So it's been really incredible to see, like, the average age of our volunteers is just 16 years old.
That's a real testament to your work, that the average age is 16, not just the work that you're putting in, but just like you're saying, the youth are really the engine behind this, that the youth looking ahead at the future, the planet they're already inheriting, and really wanting to lift their voices up and fight for a better future is really powerful. And that goes as well to you being the youngest member on the United Nations inaugural Youth Advisory Group on climate change.
Yeah, so about 6 months after I started Climate Cardinals, the UN decided to nominate me to serve on this inaugural Youth Advisory Group on climate change to the Secretary General, and I was ultimately selected to represent the United States as the youngest member on the group. And so what we're tasked with is we're supposed to advise the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, on his climate strategy. And so essentially we meet with him every 3 months, quarterly, and we give him feedback on the temperament of the youth climate movement in our respective regions. So my colleagues come from India, Moldova, countries from all over the world. And so we basically aggregate our different experiences and talk about what young people in our countries care about and what we personally are advocating for. And not only is it possible, but it really should be mandated. And so I look forward to seeing that our youth advisory group sets an example for other organizations and institutions to include young people at the highest levels of decision making.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to have that intergenerational piece, and it starts at the bottom. It starts with the youngest, right? Vic, with all of your advocacy, I mean, always starting this from such a young age and lifting your voice up throughout your youth, like when you were speaking out and speaking up for justice and for your community, to all those decision makers that are, decades older than you, what do you feel like folks that are older in those generations that are still in positions of power to make those decisions, what do you feel like they just don't understand about what's going on? And
yeah, I would say that one of the massive blind spots I find is just all of the like a lack of knowledge about the implications about having an intersectional identity and taking into account intersectionality when we're talking about the climate crisis, and realizing that we're not just talking about the climate crisis in terms of every time there's a natural disaster that happens, but keeping in context that the people who are being impacted might also be at risk of eviction that month, or might live in a food desert, or might have to deal with just the day-to-day struggles that already come with being a part of a historically marginalized or historically oppressed group.
Yeah, I mean, I've had that conversation so many times, inside of EPA with other folks in environmental regulation outside of EPA. People kept coming to me asking, well, what is climate justice? And I'm like, what do you mean, what is climate justice? It's justice. When you're talking about climate, You talk about justice, that's climate justice. It's the same if you're talking about economic justice or other forms of environmental justice, it's justice. It's the same folks who have been systemically oppressed, who have been dumped on for generations, get hit first, get hit worst by climate change or any other impact. And you got to focus on them with any of these policies. And that's been a long time coming, really, to build that level of realization. But I feel like today, I mean, personally, just from where I am at EPA, the Biden-Harris administration, folks like Administrator Regan really are prioritizing that fact that no, it's equity and it's justice first and foremost in everything that we do. And if we miss that, then any of the policies that come after just aren't really going to be solving any of the issues that are really right in front of us. It has been, though, I know, a huge struggle with COVID, with the pandemic over the last couple of years. And Sophia, especially with you operating on such an international plane with your organization in so many different countries, how have you seen the COVID-19 pandemic really impact your efforts to spread education and awareness around the world about what's happening with climate change?
I think I noticed a couple of different major shifts in the climate movement as a result of the pandemic. I think that before the pandemic, a lot of our work was focused on getting out into the streets, protesting, marching, striking, which I think was very, very effective. I mean, in 2019, we were able to get millions of people to go out into the streets and strike for climate action. And I think it was able to tangibly put pressure on elected officials. But ever since COVID hit, we've really had to do a lot of our activism remotely, which is why I think I got particularly lucky when I started Climate Cardinals, in that I was able to continue my activism just from my childhood bedroom, just because all of us were able to do the translations and to be able to coordinate our initiatives from the safety and comfort from our homes. And I think that another opportunity that it presented is that, like, now I work with people from all over the world. Like I was saying earlier, like my colleagues, some of them are in Fiji, they're in like Sudan. And so I've been able to really work with people from all over the world, just because Zoom and so many other like online meeting conferences have become so much more prevalent.
You might not realize it, but you guys just got into a fight, not for the next couple of years or not for the next decade. You just got in a fight for life. Because working for justice, working for rights, working for equity, it's a generational effort. It is a generational goal for us. So you, so young, like, how does this affect you personally?
I mean, I think for me, that the way that it's impacted me is that even though it's like scary as a young person, I mean, I couldn't even vote until like a year or 2 years ago. And like I recently turned 20, I was 18, it feels like just a week ago. And so for so long, I felt like I was powerless and there wasn't much that I could do in the way of like climate advocacy, just because I felt like so much of decision-making and power was concentrated in adults. But now I honestly feel really hopeful seeing all the incredible work that young people are doing every single day to champion climate action, to push for progressive legislation.
I'm glad. I'm really glad. It gives you a lot of hope. Vic, like when you're closing your eyes at night and you're reflecting on your day and you're thinking about your future and you're thinking about a lifetime of advocating for justice, does that keep you up at night, or does that really charge you up to get a good night's sleep and get up the next day and get back out there in the fight?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that, exactly like you said, once you kind of get the bug in you to fight for justice and to be an activist, it's kind of hard to let that go. And just knowing that I get to have so many interests throughout my life and still trying to interweave the conversation of why we need to be fair to each other and why we need to treat our neighbor as best as possible. It doesn't sound daunting, honestly. It sounds like a really exciting example of the type of the way that I hope other people feel encouraged to live, a life where you can care about what your neighbor is going through or what somebody who isn't like you is going through, and still do it in a way that's fulfilling to you and through the interests that you care about. And so, yeah, I think it's exciting, honestly. Sometimes I'm a little bit stressed about, waking up every morning and feeling like I know too much about the things that are wrong in the world, but it also feels really empowering at the same time, because I know that I could provide that knowledge with other people. So hopefully we could get the power together to make a difference about it.
I get that way sometimes too. I just feel a little bit overwhelmed when there's so many challenges, and maybe you've had one of those days where, it's just challenge after challenge, and there isn't even that little bit of good news somewhere. It's like, oh my gosh, what are we doing? I just want to run away to the mountains and forget about it all. But you get up the next day and you keep on fighting, because that's where it is. Hey, so I think we're coming up on the end of our time here. Vic, is there any last words, any kind of thoughts or hopes that you want to send out there as we kind of close this conversation?
Yeah, I think that I just hope that it's an inspiring conversation. It's really awesome to get to talk with you also, Sophia. You've been doing really awesome work, and it's just always cool to get young climate activists together to talk about everything that's going on and hopefully encourage other people to get involved in the ways they can. Because it's really not too complicated. I mean, we might make it sound complicated with all the stuff that we've gotten to do and all the work that we put into it, but sometimes it's just shooting an email to your local organization, looking at the fights that are going on around you, and sort of just jumping in head first, because there could be a lot of friends to make or free snacks at meetings to have. So yeah, that's all I have to add.
I really just want to echo what Vic said, and that I think that anyone can be a climate activist. Anyone can do the work that we're doing. And I think really it's about realizing that what you need to aim for is progress, not perfection. So you can start by making small changes in your own behavior, changes in your own life. And then I remember when I first got involved with climate organizations, I literally was just spamming different climate activists with DMs on Instagram, asking how I could support them and how I could get involved. And it really is that simple. I think there are so many incredible opportunities to get involved with community organizations, even national and international organizations, as well as even starting your own organization or your own school club. And so I think it's just about taking that first step, but I really think that anyone can do it.
I can guarantee you, as somebody who used to do that from the outside and now does that inside of the government, the only way things change, the only way the decision makers ever hear the truth and are going to make a different decision is if the folks out there in the communities, if the folks out there who are being impacted speak up and speak out and make them confront that reality. It is not just important, it is absolutely the most crucial thing in making change happen. So I just want to lift up both of you. You're so incredible. You're such great examples. You're so inspiring to me. I really hope that, when we get back to a place where we can travel, if I'm in your community, I hope we get a chance to see one another. And next time you two are in Washington, D.C., I would love to meet y'all. I would love to introduce you to folks in EPA and them hear from you as well. You're both really such just huge inspirations. Thank you both so much for what you do. And thanks to everyone who's listening in. Like we've all said here on this, just speaking up, speaking out for your community, for rights, for justice, for confronting the climate change crisis. It is the most necessary thing and the biggest responsibility that all of us bear.
Up next, social impact, climate and culture. And now, social impact, climate and culture, with Rachel Carlson and Yvonne Hutchinson.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Carlson. I'm CEO and co-founder of Guild Education. So in our work with WM, we are ensuring that every employee and their dependents, which is really, really innovative, have access to education, whether that's a college degree, a certificate, a credential, high school completion, English as a second language, or postgraduate degrees and certificates in cyber and digital analytics, so that every employee in the organization and their families have pathway. And it's been remarkable to watch the new career opportunities, the new economic freedom and joy that's being unlocked amongst the WM families today. And thrilled to be here today, and especially be having a conversation with Yvonne.
Hi, I'm Yvonne Hutchinson, CEO and founder of ReadySet, which is a diversity, inclusion, and equity consulting firm. Also co-founder of the nonprofit Project Include, which focuses on building inclusion in tech, and the author of How to Talk to Your Boss About Race, speaking up without getting shut down. Super excited to be here in conversation with you, Rachel.
Thrilled to be here and already have your book circled for one of my reads in the next month. This is going to be fun because we're just going to interview each other and get to know each other through this conversation. But I have been excited learning about you and would love to hear a bit about your journey and the motivations, your why of why you do the work you do.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it succinct because my road, I think like so many people, was a windy one. I graduated law school in 2007 and became an international human rights lawyer. And at that time I was working in wartime countries like Afghanistan. I was in Thailand on the border with Burma. And, I was really sort of driven by this idea of justice and rectifying harm. And in my mind, that was, wartime was really where that was like happening, right? So I thought that's where I could be the most effective. And gradually I started transitioning out of that situations where there were more structural violence. And eventually, right around 2012, I found myself in Nicaragua working with sugarcane workers who were dying of occupational disease. And it struck me how in that community, the thing that they needed most to live, work, was also the thing that was killing them. And I really started to think about the workplace as a place of opportunity, but also a place of harm, and how many of us often have to navigate that tension. So after a couple of years, I just really thought, I want to work on the future of work. There's a lot of changes in the workplace that are happening now that are going to have ripple effects for generations. So I came back to the US. I started Ready Set because I really think diversity, equity, and inclusion is the future of work issue, specifically who gets access to high opportunity employment, how people are treated at work, and the kind of physical and psychological impacts that have on them, and then the impact that organizations that aren't diverse or inclusive have on the world. All of those things for me are part of the why. I think that the workplace is a really powerful place. It's where we spend the bulk of our time. And I think it's where we're positioned to have the greatest impact. That's my why. I would love to hear your why too, because I know we work in similar spaces. So yeah, what's your why, Rachel?
I'm just obsessed with education as the key that unlocks opportunity. And I just deeply believe that talent is distributed in every zip code, in every county, in every part of the world, but opportunity is not. And until we get education available, you cannot solve some of the problems related to democracy, related to work, related to economic freedom. So that's the personal side. Professionally, not dissimilar from you, I thought I was going to do this work in the public sector and started my career in politics, had the blessing of being on the Obama 2008 campaign and then into the White House. But after spending time in the community college sector, I realized that the engine for distributing education and opportunity to the 88 million Americans who work on the front lines today, the number one way to do that was actually through the private sector. And so at Guild today, we work with the largest employers in the country and only the most innovative, including Waste Management and WM, which is a real joy, to help make sure that all of their employees have opportunity to advance their education and to have real career opportunity in their lives.
So I'm curious then, it seems like we've both been kind of on this journey of impact. How do you define social impact for yourself?
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic. I think about impact in a really intersectional way. And part of that is that at Guild, we're a B Corp and a public benefit corporation, which is sort of nonprofit meets venture impact organization meets impact investing funding arm. It's not a well-known thing. But what I believe is that the models that are going to change the world are those that align incentives. And so at Guild, we only get paid when we create positive student impact, period. We've designed our entire business model that way. And I just believe that this discontent that we're having with capitalism in the US today could be so benefited from aligning the incentives of capital allocation with impact, but in the world more broadly. I think really from a humanistic lens, are we letting people live a better life tomorrow than today? But I'm curious how you think about that, given your wide purview and your training in international rights.
I think for me at Ready Set, we just wanted to kind of do impact at scale. For me, there's freedom in that structure for us to really scale our impact. And at the same time, I think I just really have a kind of, I don't want to say black and white view, but it boils down to a very simple question for me. It always has, which is the world better with me in it? Is the world better with our company in it? Are we leaving people better off than the way that we find them?
How did you know you were going to take your seat at the table in cultural change?
Well, I mean, for me, I think it has always come back to impact. I struggle with the table metaphor because for me, I want to be a driver of cultural change. I want to put forward cultural change, and cultural change is uncomfortable, right? So it's not a matter of like, I don't want to be at that table. I think there's a problem with the table, right? So like, I want to build something new. Maybe it's not a table. Maybe it's a house. Maybe it's but a community. Like, I think for me, there was never a moment where I thought that I could be in the world without having some kind of positive impact and pushing it forward. Yeah, I feel like that dichotomy, that tension has come up more and more lately. I have to say, I'm a little bit of a tough nut when it comes to this. I think there's a lot of good intent out in the world, but I think what really counts is actually looking at impact. Like, we could talk about intent all day, right? And all of us mean well, and that's great. But at the end of the day, there's some very real people whose lives are negatively impacted in a really harsh way, that for whom things aren't going to change by the nature of our intention alone. And I think now is the time where we really have to measure the ways in which we're impacting the lives of other people and how we're showing up in the world. And I think particularly with organizations like ours that are like social change organizations, that hard metric, that difficult metric, that uncomfortable metric is so critical.
What it makes me think of is like, how do we make sure that what we're talking about is measuring progress? It's that we're trying to measure progress. And you know more than I do, but I would be curious to hear your perspective. Where are we making the most progress? How can we help make sure that progress is what we are celebrating behind the impact measurement?
Yeah, well, I think we measure impact just like we measure other aspects of our business, right? For example, hiring. Like, hiring discrimination for African Americans hasn't changed since the 90s, right? So just looking at who comes into your organization, I think is really important, and what your pipeline looks like, but also looking at how long people stay. I also think looking at promotion rates, like how quickly people get promoted at work and who has access to power in an organization is really important. Because what we often see are organizations that really try to focus on DEI, and they get DEI in at the earlier stages, the earlier career levels. But when it comes to senior management and senior leadership, it's just not there. And it's not there because people aren't getting promoted. And it's also not there because people aren't getting hired in at those levels. So I want to hear from you too, like, where do you feel like you see the greatest progress happening? And then I also want to hear how you stay motivated too.
Yeah, they're really interrelated for me. My core values are connection and growth. So when things are growing, when I'm growing, when my team, when our product and our outcomes, so they're really related. Where I'm seeing the most progress right now is realizing that the talent of the next generation of your company already works at your company as the unlock. And once companies realized that, and they looked into their frontline workforce and they looked into their middle ranks, well, guess what? Those teams look like America. They are wildly diverse. They are wildly motivated. They are loyal to the company and they want to learn. And so the increasing growth mindset that I'm seeing companies adopt, which is that we do have the employees that we need for the future. They're already here. They just need new skills. Whether companies were ready to reckon with that growth mindset or not, the labor economy just forced them to realize it. And so it's happening both consciously and to them. And that intersection has been tremendous, because we are seeing companies totally transform how they promote from within. And by doing that, they're creating economic mobility, and they're wildly diversifying the middle and upper ranks of their company.
Do you have tips that companies can think about in terms of leveraging that workforce, or how we think about encouraging people to have the growth mindset that you're talking about?
Oh, do I? How much time are you left? Kidding. I would say the simplest is this. We built all of our systems for hiring, promotion, you name it, off the job description. The least interesting thing about any of us is our job description. Here's how you actually do it. What you do is you look beyond the skills. What are your preferences? What do you do in your free time? Do you love video games? Have you ever built something? How quickly did you learn the last skill our company taught you? And were you in the top 10% of that learning growth curve? But I think that's what we're going to have to change, is we're going to have to stop using the 1990s paper and pen to decide what people are capable of. I don't know. That's what I've got. What do you think? What are you seeing as the biggest changes that corporations that you work with are adjusting to right now, and how are they doing?
Well, I think the biggest change is just sort of, which we've kind of been alluding to, is like the rise in worker consciousness and how workers think about their relationship to work and what their expectations are. And so I think we're seeing that, like, it's like you're saying, it's a competitive edge to be able to sort of support employee growth and have employees feel included. I think another emergent challenge that we're seeing that's super interesting, and I always say, like, the challenge is the opportunity. So in each of these, there's like an opportunity to do something great, is the entry into of Gen Z into the workforce, and their relationship to work is totally different than what ours is. And, you know, our tolerance for the way things have always been done, like, that doesn't fly with them. And so this is a very new, like, the multi-generational workforce. The workforce has always been multi-generational, but this is like this addition of a new generation, I think, is really shifting some expectations. And I think that there's a really powerful moment here for us to say, like, we can really make the workplace a place of opportunity, not just for the few, but for the many, right? And I think that workers are in such a great position now to leverage where they are to change the organizations that they're in. So, I mean, that's so many of my clients are dealing with this. Like, what do we do? And I'm like, you build them up, like, you know what I mean? Like, you got to get on board. Like, listen, the train is coming down the tracks. Like, it's happening. So what you do is you adapt.
It's Gen Z driving the conversation, which I love, but it's boomers too saying, I don't know that I'm going to come back post-COVID unless you're going to invest in me and help me overcome these scary new technologies and tools that have been put into the workplace. So I'm excited by that. I wanted to ask you something else. This is personal to me and in the work we lead. You know, the work that a lot of companies have been doing around DE&I over the last 2 years has been so hard and so at times uncomfortable, and it can be deeply unifying. And I'd love to hear, like, when and how do you see DE&I unify corporate culture?
Yeah, I mean, that answer to me is really easy. And I think it kind of ties together a conversation we've been having today, which is like, it unifies when it's part of the mission. You know, there are folks who still think of DEI as like a nice to have or even kind of a must have. And I always say, no, it's like actually neither of those things. It has to be embedded in your DNA. You need to have a company where you can have that hybrid workforce and everybody's positioned to succeed. These are all DEI challenges. You know, a company that understands a customer base that fundamentally looks so different than it has for generations prior. You know, a company that feels representative. All of these are DEI challenges. And the second you get a company and a CEO to realize that is the second it becomes a unifier, because then everybody has a stake in the game. It's so tempted for someone to say, you know, and I hear this all the time, like, I'm a white guy, you know, like DEI is not about me. And I say, well, you know, like white men, 45% of white men cover up who they are at work. So it is about you, you know, and it's not just about the workplace you're experiencing now, but what happens when you get to be 45 or 50, people don't see your talent anymore, right? And what about the workplace that your kids are going into? We all have a stake in this. And these questions, they affect all of us. Yes, people from marginalized groups are more heavily impacted and I think are less represented and experience more economic and political harm as a result. But at the end of the day, being successful at DEI means that a company is going to be successful generally, and the company is going to be able to weather the storm that we're currently in right now.
Just a couple decades ago, companies spent 80% of their balance sheet on the old PP&E, not protective, but plant, property, equipment, right? The old finance terms of assets. Flip to today, 80% of companies' assets are spent on people. And so if you're spending 80% of your company's assets on people, yeah, your CFO is still important, but your chief people officer and your head of diversity, equity, inclusion are actually the key asset allocators. They are the people building the environment through which the assets are successful. And I don't mean to talk about people as assets, but I actually think that head shift, if every CEO thought about it that way, it would actually help us accomplish these goals. And I think many are starting to have that shift. We are now businesses made up of people in the knowledge economy.
That's absolutely right.
What role are young people going to play in creating social impact and a more sustainable future, to the theme of today's conference?
Oh, wow. I love Gen Z. I think that they're an amazing generation. And, I struggle with this question a little bit because I don't want to fall into sort of an ageist paradigm. I think we all have a role to play when it comes to creating change in the workplace. I think, however, that Gen Z's expectations are fundamentally different than our expectations, and their drive to push for change is so powerful. Like, you just can't ignore them. And I think that they're making us all step up a little bit. They're pushing us all to really critically think about the role that work plays in our lives and how the relationship we want to have with our workplaces. I do think it means reconsidering work-life balance. I do think it means thinking about how we collaborate and connect. I do think it means thinking about how people have what their growth expectations are, and the influence that they expect to have in their companies. All these things we're now having to really take a critical eye towards because of Gen Z and the different expectations that they bring into the workplace. But I also think what's beautiful about this is I don't think their interests are misaligned with the interests of everybody else. I think they're just saying it louder and talking about it more. And I think that's great, because I feel like we should have been talking about this stuff for a long time. So I think that they're an amazing catalyst, but I feel like there's across generations, there are people who are invested in this change, and that's what makes it so exciting.
Yeah, it makes me think of the fact that, Gen Z is showing up at the table with more urgency and more bravery around conversations about the climate, about racism, about income inequality. The addition that I always like to add is that my ask of Gen Z, and I'm not decades older, but I got a little bit on them, is to not forget that if you come with generosity of intent, you can then focus on impact. And why I say that is that the tragedy of Gen Z is that they've grown up in the most politicized era in American history by some stretches of the imagination, or at least of the modern media age, in terms of the vitriol with which our media allows people to question one another. And so I think the great gift of Gen Z is the bravery. But when that bravery can come with an assumption of good intent, then we get to focus on the impact.
I think too, just like leaning into the emotional intelligence part is so important, like you're saying. And also I feel like they're equipped to do it in a way that I don't know if we necessarily were, if we had that level of introspection or awareness, or we needed to have that maturity.
How do we apply those same lessons to the climate change fight we need to have, to the fight around income inequality that we need to have, to the fight around racism that we need? So really, you're leaving me with lots to think about. This is so fun. Thanks so much. I can't wait to hang out with you more. I hope this is not our last conversation.
As do I. I can't wait till COVID dies down and we can be in person, because I would actually just love to grab a coffee and nerd out over all of the topics that we talked about today. It'd be so much fun.
Agreed. WM, have us back. We want to hang out more.
Up next, environment, social, and governance impact. Sustainability leaders on success.
When I was a little girl, My dad had big trucks, and so I fell in love with the big trucks right from a little young age. I was seriously daddy's girl. I followed in his footsteps in a lot of different ways. Big trucks became my thing. It's my jam. My name is Jennifer King, and I'm from San Bernardino, and I work at Waste Management, and I drive a garbage truck. I've loved trucks since I was a little girl, and now I get to drive the biggest, coolest trucks there are on the road, and I feel the same excitement now. So in the morning when I get here, we walk out to our trucks and we start our pre-start procedure. We check the air in our tires. We check all of our lights to make sure our lights are working. We do a full brake check to make sure there's no air leaks in the brake system. We just basically look over the whole entire truck to make sure that it's safe to be out there on the road with everybody. When I got out here, my husband basically said, hey, you can do anything you want to do. And I was like, oh, I want to be a garbage truck driver. And he was like, I said you could do anything you want to do. And I was like, yeah, I want to be a garbage truck driver. I know that my dad would be extremely proud of me today for what I'm doing. This is what he taught me to do. On my routes, on a daily basis, I might have 1,100 to 1,400 stops, which might seem like a lot, but to me, that's 1,100 opportunities to connect with my customers. The community that I work in, they've kind of taken me in as part of their family. I could have never asked for a better relationship with people. When I see the kids run out and they're all excited and jumping around and they're happy, that's what I saw in me when I was that age. And when I'm dealing with these kids, it's for them to do something or see something or experience something that maybe they can't normally experience anywhere else. And that's the highlight of their day. There's impact of what I'm doing for them. And hopefully maybe one day they're going to go, I want to be like her. I want to make other people smile. And so whatever I'm giving them, they're obviously feeling happy about it. And now they're making me feel happy too. And it's just like this big old snowball circle. And if I'm going to be here all day driving around this big bad truck, I'm going to have fun doing it. And I'm going to make other people's life happy and fun doing it if that's what they want. So I always put a message on the post with it that is like, today's a new day, so let's go get it. You know, be safe, be positive, be happy, be kind. Every message is like that. This is me and this is what I do. And when I see those smiles, I keep doing it. Every day is another chance to bring a smile to someone's face, and that's what makes me excited about tomorrow.
An act of kindness you don't see every day was caught on camera in Independence. This is such an awesome story. Seems so simple, a man wheeling an empty trash can to the home where it was collected.
But the video is going viral, and while it may seem simple, it means so much more to the sanitation worker and the homeowner.
My name is Billy James Shelby. I'm from Kansas City, Missouri, born and raised. I work for Waste Management, been there 5 years, and I plan on retiring from Waste Management. Every day you find yourself doing something different. You're not sitting in an office or stuck in no building. So in that regard, it's very different. I want people to know that trash workers, we take pride in doing our job. I feel like I'm invested in the community as far as keeping it clean And I think that goes a long way as far as people appreciation. I learned through doing this job how friendly people can be. Once you deal with them on a weekly basis, you see the best of people. Smiles are contagious. I love it.
Maybe a year and a half ago, an incident happened here. A lady fell and hurt herself pretty bad, and I actually was here, was able to assist.
When I heard about Billy and Opal, I thought it was outstanding. I think it really was an opportunity to show some of the incredible things that our folks do every day that get unrecognized.
How you doing, darling? Hey! You staying out of trouble?
I was doing my regular route. I dumped the trash across the street, and I noticed Opal came to get her trash, return her trash can, and she was walking up here, and she must have tripped in this little hole, and she fell backwards and hit her head. So when I seen her fall, I knew she was in trouble because she immediately started saying, I'm gonna die. And I come over here and I took my jacket off because it was cold outside, and I put my jacket over her, and I was telling her, you're not gonna die, you're not gonna die. And then I called my boss, of course, and he told me just wait till the police come and explain to him what had happened. The following week I come by, when I dumped her trash, I just told myself, man, take her trash back up. I'm not gonna allow that to happen again. She's an elderly woman. So I just started taking her trash up from that point forward. Next thing I know, I'm on TV.
So the ring footage came about because I do often check anytime Mom has movement in the front of her house. And so I was listening to the interaction between Billy and my mom and just how much he just was genuinely caring for her and just being a friend to her, and just sent it to our family group on Facebook and said, hey, I just want you to know how much, this guy cares for Mom, and was encouraged by my kids to post it on Facebook, and then they all shared it, and it just blew up from there.
Bless you as always, darling. You're looking good, like that hair, you got it down. I gotta work on mine. See you later, darling. Bye-bye.
We're so fortunate to have somebody like Billy in our community that's watching out for our elderly and everybody else.
I feel like I was just doing something I'm supposed to do as a human being. I know it makes my mother proud. I'm proud as well because I know I was doing the right thing for the right reason. And that's the best part of it. I just want to make tomorrow better than today. And hey, today's been pretty good.
And now, environment, social, and governance impact. Sustainability Leaders on Success with Tara Hemmer, Denise Naguib, Kristen Seaman, and Molly Wood.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this panel. I'm Molly Wood, a longtime journalist and recently turned climate tech investor. And I am delighted to be joined by three incredible sustainability leaders who are really helping to define a brand new role in a lot of organizations, Chief Sustainability Officer. I'm actually going to let each of these distinguished guests introduce herself and tell us a little bit about what they do. And I'll start with our host, Waste Management, Tara Hemmer. Please tell us about your role.
Hi, everyone. So great to be here. So I am the company's first Chief Sustainability Officer. I took the role in July of 2021. And really an exciting time. I have all of the traditional duties and responsibilities of a CSO, really thinking about our own carbon footprint and how we change that, but also how we tackle some of the bigger sustainability trends and themes in the world today. And as a portion of that, I have some of our sustainability businesses that I'm leading and growing in the recycling, renewable energy, and organic space.
And then I'll go counterclockwise in my Zoom window next to Kristen Seaman from GM.
Sure. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me here today. And I'm Kristen Seaman from General Motors. I've been in the CSO role since March of 21, and really just excited to see the transformation that we're making as an industry. And GM's really been at the forefront of that. So it's a great time to be in this position. I also have responsibility for our sustainable workplaces, which includes all of our traditional construction and facilities work, as well as environmental. So it's really a great match between the two intersections of the business as we work to transform both internally and create new workplaces in order to achieve our long-term vision of a world with zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion.
And Denise, that leaves us with you.
Great. Thank you so much, and great to be here. So I lead global sustainability and supplier diversity at Marriott. And so what does that mean? My team and I are really responsible for both the strategy and the ultimate pull through of that strategy across all of the areas of sustainability, environmental sustainability. In partnership with my colleague on the social impact side, we lead our company's platform. And so we do everything from the setting the goals to implementing the programs across our 8,000 or so hotels to reporting against that work on the sustainability side, as well as my team leads supplier diversity, which is a really unique space to really drive diversity within our supply chain and ensure that we're really letting a diversity of talent be at the table for bidding on opportunities for spend of products and services.
Yeah. Talk to me about the nuts and bolts of your job. Are you internally facing? Are you customer facing? Are you all of those things? You know, is it, how are you developing metrics? Like, it is so new and I think rising in importance, right? How do you get your hands around where to start in a company of these sizes? That's a grab bag, but I will call on you if you want.
I could start. I mean, my first answer would be yes, 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 and yes. We're internally facing, we're externally facing, we're with government agencies, we're with customers, we're with NGOs, we're with frontline employees, senior leadership. It really depends on the day. And so sustainability now is part of and embedded in any good company's business strategy. I think you've seen that with WM and really where we're headed in playing in the circular economy and really figuring out how to help our customers find new homes for the materials that they manage and find new lives for them. But that really does involve a very collaborative approach, and partnerships exist internally, externally, pulling together different folks. And it really is a role of influence. Most of us don't have big teams. We have to use the tools that we have in our toolbox to get others within our organizations to act.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think the uniqueness about this role too is as you said, Tara, it also is external, and we collaborate together. I mean, joining a panel like this and seeing you on the phone, it's like seeing seeing you on Zoom, right? It's seeing friends, and I feel like because the mission is much bigger than any of us or any of our companies, it inspires a collaboration that you don't see in many other functions per se. And so having that joint belief and desire to make things better for the next generation and coming up with ideas and frankly sharing ideas across corporations on maybe what one of us have done and has worked either internally or externally is really a unique opportunity and a very unique part of the role.
There are no, Denise, so do you agree there are no trade secrets in the Chief Sustainability Office?
For sure. I mean, the funny thing is, Kristen and Tara and I just recently got to spend a few days together a few months ago. And I think part of it, it's like the camaraderie across companies to work together, yes, to share best practice, but also to share pain points, right? To figure out how did you crack X nut, right? How did you work through this challenge is so critical because we are such unique elements within our companies, and really thinking across how did others do it, as opposed to sort of deep in the organization trying to get some of those answers, because oftentimes it involves so much background and knowledge and understanding of the space that it really does take somebody who's sort of doing similar work to understand. So yeah, across companies, I mean, I work back to the original comment, yes, and yes, both internal, external, but also across companies, our competitors today, right? We work absolutely closely together with my peers because we have the same owners, we've got the same models. And so some of those things are really benefit all of us by working collaboratively across so many areas, whether it's competitors or customers or suppliers, et cetera.
Have your roles, do you think, gotten more important within your companies? Certainly you have, I would imagine, many more customers demanding real progress towards sustainability. You have financial incentives and risks related to the climate crisis. And so I wonder, like, are you finding yourself in a lot more important meetings than you used to?
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yes. When did that start, would you say? I mean, if you really had to, was it marked? Did you notice that there was a time when all of a sudden you started getting more invites? I see Denise nodding there.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because we sort of semi-joke around that I'm like on sales's paycheck, because like it was when the customer started to ask. That's when a significant pivot, because then you could correlate it most directly to revenue, which moves the needle more than anything, right? There was always so many efforts that have been happening inside the organization, and engineering teams were doing a great job, and operators were doing a great job in a variety of things, and culinary teams. But when it started to be asked by the customer to us as a supplier, that changed the game. Sales got engaged. Then, when sales is engaged, then the channels around them, right? The distribution, all of the e-commerce, all of those organizational parts get engaged. So what I think has been significant for us is the growth in demand in the last 2 years at a time when our industry has been the most decimated. So like the travel industry obviously has been significantly hit by COVID, yet sustainability on behalf of travel has skyrocketed, both from the consumer side as well as the companies themselves. And so that to me was sort of shocking, if you will, is going from, the impact of the business to that, like the spike of sustainability demand at like simultaneous. It just felt like, wait a second, nobody's even traveling. Why are they talking about it? But it was great. I mean, it's fantastic, but that was a significant pivot in terms of the external demands from our perspective.
I think Tara and I are both newer to our roles than even Denise. And just in the year that I've been in this role, I think the attention and focus on climate, you can't turn on any TV show or anything and not see a commercial that's not just about the product, but it's about how the product is impacting the environment or what the company is doing for sustainability or for society, and very much like Denise said, even during the challenges we had during COVID and, the chip shortage that's impacting our industry, the amount of investment that was put into our transformation, continued to rise over that period of time, up to $35 billion. And so, the company is focused on it, but it's a unique time when the sustainability goals for the company are the same as the business goals. They're one and the same, and there's really no separation. And so it continues to show how important it is to us both internally and externally.
I think the only two things I would add, because I think Kristen and Denise did a great job of a broader overview, but what I've observed is, you have the customer pull, but there's also a fair amount of education that needs to occur inside our own companies. And there's a recognition that folks are at different portions they're at different points within their own sustainability journey. And so we can't assume that the entire organization is in the same spot. So having to bring people along so that they can meet their customer expectations that's something that is key and has been a significant portion of my time, educating some of our leaders and making sure that they're armed with the tools that they need to be able to execute on our broader business strategy. And then the other key piece beyond customers that we've seen really elevated requests is from our investors, really seeing a lot more in the way of investor inquiries, wanting to engage and understand what we're doing related to climate impacts. For us, circularity is key. So how are we growing our recycling business, and wanting to understand what we're doing in the social impact space.
Let me pick up on that because I want to ask each of you about your specific companies, your industries, because not only are you in these roles, but you're in these roles within organizations that are kind of front and center to the climate conversation, right? Real estate and the way that people experience hotel stays. Obviously, transportation, pretty big, climate related sector. And then waste. So Tara, talk about WM and give us some specifics if you would. Like if you have, 3 things on your very crowded plate, what's your meat, potatoes, and Brussels?
Brussels. I love it.
I don't know why Brussels became a priority for me right now.
I do like Brussels sprouts. So hopefully that's a positive.
You just gotta shape them. And they're great.
As the largest environmental solutions provider in North America, obviously we have a large landfill presence, which is an opportunity for us. And I'll get to that in a moment. But we are also North America's largest residential recycler, and a lot of folks don't necessarily know that. So when we look at what are some of the biggest opportunities and the things that are on my plate, it is around how do we turn sustainability into an opportunity. And we have our customers who are all going through a decarbonization transition, and many of them, especially consumer products companies, are really looking at how do we get the materials that we produce back into the stream so they can be turned into something else. So it really is around expanding our recycling platforms. We've announced that we're going to invest in 2022 over $200 million in recycling infrastructure, and that takes us to over $700 million over the last 5 years. And a key piece of this is to put that infrastructure in places where we might have areas of the country that are underserved, but where we can unlock some of the supply that's presently trapped in the trash that goes into our landfills. And related, you can't look at a company like Waste Management without acknowledging that a significant portion of our greenhouse gas emissions comes from our landfills. And so we're doing a lot of work in that space to look at how can we reduce our overall emissions, and at the same time make some key pivots to play in the renewable energy space. And that includes taking the landfill gas that's generated at our facilities and converting that landfill gas to renewable natural gas to be used in lieu of a transportation fuel. And for us, that goes back into our compressed natural gas trucks. So those are some key areas. They're meaty, and they're also ones that are going to drive significant growth for our company long term, and hopefully help others outside of our company, other companies with their sustainability goals.
I'm going to want to have like a 9-hour conversation with you at some other time about urban mining, but
absolutely, bring it on.
I want to stay with your specific sectors and your issues. Kristen, I mean, you've got this on both ends, right? There's the actual supply and the manufacturing, and then there's what cars do when they get on the road.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, GM has really been at the forefront of the industry's transformation. We made some really bold goals at the beginning of last year around our commitment to be carbon neutral in our global products and operations by 2040, and eliminating a plan to eliminate tailpipe emissions from our light duty vehicles by 2035. I talked a little bit earlier about our renewable energy goals and the advancement of that to be 100% sourced by renewable energy in the US in all of our operations by 2025, and then globally by 2035. But in reality, GM's been manufacturing world-class vehicles and delivering innovative mobility services such as Cruise and BrightDrop and OnStar for over 100 years. Right, we've been in the EV space for over 25 years, and traditionally have done a lot in our facilities around environmental initiatives and really driving that performance. But it's really pulling it all together now. And when we announced our vision back in 2017, to create a world with zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion, and 000 is a lofty goal, but it's something that we're focused on and committed to. And it really led to some really important business growth and innovation in our company, both not just in electric vehicles, but also in autonomous. And so as we look at focusing on how we impact both our social and environmental footprint, there's no doubt that the greatest ESG opportunity really is an all-electric carbon neutral future. Our Ultium battery is a highly flexible global EV platform that's really a game changer in the business, driving down costs, increasing range, and opening up really unique design potential to offer products. One of the things that we feel is very important is having products across every segment and every price point, so that this transition to all electric is also an all-inclusive one, and that it doesn't leave anybody behind. And so that pioneering spirit and that transformation and innovation that's really been in our DNA for more than 100 years is helping moving us towards that goal. We've got a lot of focus on the technology and the innovation, but also about how we do it and making sure that our solutions account for climate inequities. Tara talked about that a little bit as well. It needs to be an all-inclusive transition as we progress down that path. So we're excited for what's happening in the industry and what we've been leading, and really that we were at the forefront of that. And it's gonna be an exciting time as we push towards both EVs, a greener grid on which to charge them on, and really how that we accomplish long-term that zero emissions future.
And then Denise, we're talking buildings and all the power that they consume. We're talking all the laundry. Like, what are tell us, of course, how you go about trying to improve sustainability in this massive industry. And also, what are the sort of like secret emitters? What's the biggest problem in the hotel universe that we wouldn't have thought of in terms of sustainability?
So one thing people just get shocked by, and this is not unique to Marriott, although we are the largest hotel company in the world, is that we don't own most of our assets. We have almost 8,000 hotels. I think as of last number, maybe just under 20 that we actually own. And the rest are owned by others. And so when you think about the built environment piece of it, that gets really tricky, because then it's not us making those investments, and there it's us influencing owners who own those assets to make the investments in transition, whether it be from renewable to renewables, or the built environment itself, like building it in a different way, and the developers. So that there's that whole piece of it, right? The built environment element is really important, both in future builds and how do we create those design standards, which we do manage a bit more, but to keep them effectively driving more and better engagement in terms of the built environment as we look to future hotels. But existing hotel portfolio, think renovations, like what can you do in existing portfolio, all of that, there's that piece of it. So we have a lot of efforts that are thinking about the built environment. Another area is on the responsible sourcing piece, and we buy a lot of stuff. 60% of what we buy is on the food and beverage side. So when you think about our footprint, and one of our biggest areas from a scope 3 perspective, our emissions, it's around food. We buy a lot of food. Think about it when you're in a hotel. What do? You eat, right? And you have entertainment, meetings, events, all that is revolving around food. So food and beverage is a really important area for us. So we've got a lot of focus on both what we buy and getting the right products in, but also food waste. That's a huge emissions piece that people don't think about, right? The amount of food that is developed and then thrown away, over 30%, if not more, that it never makes it to people's mouths. That's just sacrilege. Like, if you think about the impact of that, all of the energy that goes into producing and moving and storing all that food, there is a significant opportunity there. And we set a specific target to reduce our food waste by 50% 20% when we put out our goals in 2017, with no idea how we were going to get there, because we were literally, paving the path as we created what it was. And now as an industry, we have methodology, and how do we measure this? How do we measure waste for our sector? How do we extrapolate where we don't have data and then make it so that it's actionable at the individual hotel level? So kind of thinking about the operations element, I think there's a whole element around food and products, of course. And the other area that we're really looking at is how do we communicate these efforts so that it changes buying decisions? So I mentioned the sales, right? So that's a really important avenue for us, whether it's the individual traveler or big companies, like the two that are on the line here with me that are making buying decisions about which hotels their travelers are going to stay in. We want to be able to differentiate our hotels and drive more bookings for hotels that are having and delivering more sustainable offerings, because that's just going to be a perpetual cycle, right? The more business that they're getting because they're driving more sustainability, the more willingness that owners and investors are going to be putting into those assets to drive more sustainability. So we think that there's, the making decisions in terms of what you buy is really important, and we are helping our hotels deliver on that, and so that people can have visibility and transparency around, what's their individual carbon footprint of those hotels, and what environmental practices are they doing, what certifications do they have, to be able to really make those buying decisions look different, so that we're showing that people actually care and are making those buying decisions accordingly. So it is really vast. I mean, yes, of course, we have to look at our renewable energy footprint and reducing our overall carbon footprint. We've set a science-based target to have our footprint by 2030 and to reach net zero no later than 2050, which is a super important element of it. But we got to talk about water, we have to talk about waste, we have to talk about responsible source product, we have to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. All of that is holistically part of how we look at the overall ESG platform and how we are driving a more responsible hotel experience. And that doesn't just sit with us, right? As the largest hotel company, we are involved in a lot of industry work. And it's really important that as we work together, as we talked about before, that it is not about the competition on, coming up with the math or the approach, but really on the execution. And so that we are all, working together. There are hoteliers out there that own one hotel. It is not feasible for them to have somebody like me or my team that are going to help them drive sustainability through their hotel. And so how do we help not just our portfolio, but providing tools and resources for the industry so that others can also do the same? Because we all win when we all win.
I think if I may, I think what's really interesting about what Denise said is there are so many examples. It used to be when you talked about sustainability, folks internally and sometimes externally automatically thought that it was going to cost more money. But in Denise's food waste example, that's a great example where if you can minimize food waste, it then costs the hotel less money to procure those food items that they're putting on the plate. And we went through something similar when we made our transition to natural gas vehicles. The initial cost of those vehicles was more expensive than their diesel counterparts. But if you look at all of the benefits that those vehicles drove, first of all, our employees love them because they're cleaner. They get a new truck. Our communities love them because they're much quieter. And then we also saw that there were maintenance benefits associated with them. So actually, our total cost of ownership ended up being lower. And at the end of the day, we were able to drive our fleet emissions over a 10-year period. We reduced our fleet emissions by 46%. So sometimes, dipping your toe in the water and trying some new things, they end up having some carry-on benefits that you didn't necessarily fully appreciate when you started the process. So I think now clearly there are some things that are going to cost more money as you set up that infrastructure to be able to be more sustainable, and certainly in the energy transition, that's something that's talked about quite often. But there are plenty of other examples where sustainability goes hand in hand with being much more efficient and much more cost effective.
I want to talk about equity and who's doing this work in a minute, but before that, how does policy play into this? What are the various incentives when you run across a part of this work that might cost more, that might have a green premium, or just that doesn't have, metrics assigned to it yet, or a mature market, where then do you look to government to be either a partner or an incentive? I'll start with you, Kristen. This seems pretty relevant to your industry.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, in order to make this transition, we can't do it alone, right? It's going to take us in partnership with our, not only internally, our suppliers, our employees, and making that transition. But it's important for the infrastructure to come along with it, right? The customers need to be able to see that they can live in an EV world, and all customers need to see that, so that it's not just, charging stations at an affluent shopping mall or shopping location, but that, maybe it's at your local town center, the community center, that can enable them to see that this is part of their life in this future. It's policy. It's making sure that this transition is equitable and affordable for everyone, and really making sure that that becomes all inclusive. So policy and governments is extremely important, and making us see that all EV future come to reality.
So I think for us, again, given that we don't own most of our assets, it's about how do we use incentives that are out there to help our owners drive, whether it be to install EVs at the hotels so that when people are moving around, they can see them and be able to know, oh, I can rent a car that's an EV in order to, travel to my hotel destination, know that I have a place to charge it, or incentives around efficiency, right? I mean, the built environment has opportunities like crazy in terms of efficiency, but some of those are not yet really fully incentivized. Water efficiency opportunities. So I think thinking about, for us, like, how do we get our owners to do more based on the fact that they have some good incentives? And this is state by state right now, right? It's a lot of little pieces, and you have to sort of identify what works. And but I think there's a real opportunity here, especially as we go to more renewable opportunities. If there is a high premium right now, which there is in many, many places, it is, it's a tough call for many to make, to just pay more for the same amount of electricity. And so really figuring out what are the ways by which that can happen. And I think the other one that I know Tara is involved is around waste. I mean, there is so much opportunity there, and without having waste infrastructure in communities around, it makes it really challenging for a company like Waste Management to want to be able to pick up the waste in those communities or be able to recycle effectively. And so I think for us, as a beneficiary of that, the incentive to try to build up the infrastructure, especially in the United States, in a way that can help the hotels be able to do more with their waste, I think is real opportunistic.
I think from a policy perspective, for us, our business is so local. And while we're regulated by EPA, often the implementation is at the state or the municipal level. So we end up spending a lot of time with state and local governments really looking at the policy in particular around recycling. EPA has a broader recycling goal target to get to 50% recycling. And right now it's in the 30% range. And so how is that going to happen? Well, it's going to happen through partnership with government, but also in the private sector and with NGOs. And so figuring out where you can collaborate regionally and really try and test some things. We're doing some things with some NGOs now to try and track how education impacts how much material goes in people's recycling bins. And then if we can track that and we see that it has a strong impact, we can lift those learnings to other locations, to other customers. Likewise, we're looking at where certain communities don't have access to recycling infrastructure or don't have access to recycling collection. And can we work with other companies in those communities to stand up that recycling infrastructure? So it really is about the power of collaboration and partnerships, and policy is a key piece of it, but it's not always the answer, because there are implementation hurdles that occur at every turn when you get into the nuts and bolts of what we do each and every day.
And then for a lot of you, of course, the CSO role is tied into your company's ESG goals. That seems to be a natural and also common marriage. And so I wonder how you're thinking about building equity internally, but also into the impact of the sustainability goals that you're building. Let's start with Kristen.
Sure.
I look at my little tic tac square here, like.
No problem. No problem. So, I mean, absolutely. ESG is all inclusive, and actually, DEI is something that I've always had a lot of passion for as well. Even just myself as some of the initiatives that we've worked on over the years. But one of the things that we've done internally is we started a climate equity fund. And that is really focused on making sure, as we talked about, that that this transition is an all-inclusive one, and that communities that maybe traditionally have been disproportionately affected by climate change are not left behind in this all-electric transition or transformation, that we want to talk, that we're focused on. So, and this equitable climate action initiative that we started is really around 4 key areas. It's about the future of work and making sure that we bring our workforce along in the journey, and that we're building a pipeline of diverse talent for the future. It's around EV access, as I talked a little bit about, it's making sure that in order for people to benefit from electrification, that they can see it from an ownership across, I talked about having products in every segment and every price point, but it's also things like ride sharing and transportation of goods and services. It's about infrastructure equity. So we're working, with cities and governments to make sure that we partner and ensure that charging solutions are available to everyone where they are. One of the things we've recently done in the charging space is we've worked with our dealerships to install charging stations across the country. And the dealers know their communities more than anybody, and so by doing that, they can determine where's the most logical place for them to put charging station in their area. Maybe it's the local high school, maybe it's the local community center. And then lastly, this equitable climate action, the last thing is really the Climate Equity Fund, where we've announced a $25 million commitment to support organizations and really grassroots and community organizations that are working to close those gaps and really put services and programs in place to help this transition for their communities. So it's really been a focus for us, and I think an important space to make sure remains at the forefront of all of our conversations as we make this industry transformation, that it brings everybody along with us.
Yeah. Denise, I wonder how you approach it. I can really see a one-to-one between, for example, charging and affordability and auto manufacturing, and a one-to-one between where landfills are located, right? And whether neighborhoods have access to recycling. How do you draw that equity line from a business perspective as it relates to Marriott?
Yeah, interestingly, because for a very, very long time, we've had DEI sort of at the core. We've even had a board committee on diversity, equity, inclusion, I think for over 25 years. It's been, in play for a lot longer. So it's interesting because from the other perspective, DEI has been such a focus for us. And now we're trying to build in the sustainability connection point. And one transition that happened a couple of years ago was that board committee that focused initially on DEI is now focused on ESG, inclusive of DEI, of course. So that really does help from the most senior perspective to make sure that we are trying to make those connections across, and that our goals very much tether across. It is not yet, we don't have very clear lines, if you will, that really cross over. So we've got very clear climate efforts. We've got very clear diversity efforts. There are opportunistic times when, for example, in my space with the supplier diversity side, where we're identifying diverse suppliers that can help us with our climate work, that can help us with our environmental work, but or social efforts, but not necessarily like that clear connection of building an equity. I think historically, because we've had so much focus on DEI across 4 areas, whether it be on the ownership side. So really trying to ensure that we have diverse ownership across our hotel sector. Associate piece, of course, and then even from a communication and marketing to our customers, and then the area I mentioned before on the supply base, those are areas where we're continuously driving efforts on the equity piece of it. The connection to, I would say, like climate is still new, because we're really just in the nascent phases of really developing our deep climate strategy. Like I said, we've announced our commitment to set goals. We're just working through that strategy to how do those goals get implemented, and what does that look like? So I think we've got a lot to learn. And as we look around us, I think some of our peers in other sectors have been doing a lot of this great work. I mean, Kristen, to the point where you said $25 million investment in this space, that's fantastic. And I think we've got a lot to learn from companies like GM and Waste Management and others that are really working through this in a much more focused way.
Yeah. Tara, I imagine this is just front and center in a lot of the work you're doing, all the work you're doing, because the climate and the equity goals are so related, I would imagine, when it comes to waste management, but tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, it is really interesting because social impact is truly at the intersection of inclusion, equity, and diversity, and environmental, and all of our environmental efforts as a company. And what's interesting about social impact, right now, WM, one of our largest employee populations is drivers, and there's a national driver shortage. It's been well documented and talked about. Everyone's following. That's a piece of some of our supply chain woes. But at the same time, we have many communities across the country, and we also operate in Canada, where we have people who don't have the skills to become a driver and don't know the path to potentially work at one of our recycling plants. And that might be right down the road from where they live. So how can we work with the communities where we have our facilities to help them with upskilling and making that transition into really well-paying jobs? And then as our jobs transition, and if you think about what's happening at our recycling facilities and they are becoming more automated, we need a higher skill set in those recycling facilities. So how can we work with the communities to get the folks those skills so that they can be a part of this broader transition? And that's really the intersection of a lot of the social impact work that we're looking to do. The other key piece for us is environmental justice. We have facilities across all of the United States, over 1,200 scattered throughout, and we've done a good job of mapping where those facilities are and how they overlap from an environmental justice standpoint. And then how can we engage with those communities on really looking at how we mitigate impacts? That's critically important. And the way we're going to do that is truly through that engagement mechanism, understanding what their needs are and how can we build upon that.
I want to be mindful of your time, so I'm going to do a little lightning round and ask each of you to answer in like 30 or 45 seconds here. If you had a magic wand, if you had your one wish from the genie in the bottle, what would you want to implement today? Tara, go.
So I've been asked this question before, so it's somewhat easy. If I could wave my magic wand, I would be able to accurately measure all of our emissions instead of modeling them. And that speaks to our landfills.
Yeah, that seems, yep. Okay, I'm going to try to find you a startup that's working on just that. We'll talk.
That's a great one. I would say for me, it would be to excite and inspire everyone with the promise of an all-electric future. With the thrill of vehicles powered by electric propulsion and supported by, advanced electrical architecture, and maybe more importantly, reimagining what it means to move people and goods, including when there's no driver.
All right. So my magic wand would be very education-based. As I mentioned before, I think it's a really important base. And so I think educating will start with our employees to understand their role in driving environmental, social, diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, I think is a really important first step. So if they understand, if they've got that base knowledge, then I think they're more inspired to potentially do something in their own space, because we have to empower them. There's no way we're going to get hundreds of thousands of associates to, do something because we tell them to. They have to feel and see and identify the things that they can do.
Kristen, Tara, and Denise, I want to thank you so much for the time and the great work that you're doing. I can't wait to hear more.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it was great.
Our pleasure.
And that, friends, is the entirety of what appears to be the Sustainability Forum. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you later.